Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case. The case of Mike and Missy MacIvor. During a tropical storm in the Florida Keys, Missy MacIvor and Mike were murdered in their home. Missy was 9 months pregnant at the time, which made the case especially heartbreaking not only for the police investigating, but also for the entire state of Florida today. We explore this shocking murder. Susan Michelle Emil, also known as Missy, was born on July 24, 1962, in Titusville, Pennsylvania, from a young age. She had the ability to draw others in. She had a warm smile, a caring nature, and a kind heart. Missy had a deep love for children, which she pursued by becoming an elementary school teacher, a dream she cherished and worked hard to achieve. Mike MacIvor was born on April 15, 1961, in Cincinnati, Ohio. His parents had a deep passion for airplanes, a relatively new invention at the time. His mother worked as a flight attendant, while his father was an airline captain for Mike's family. Airplanes were not only a source of income, but also a shared love. Many childhood photos show Mike disassembling and reassembling planes with his family. Mike pursued his passion from childhood all the way to his career and eventually became a professional pilot in 1987. He met a girl named Missy, and he fell in love with her immediately. They first laid eyes on each other at a nightclub and talked non-stop all night. They felt like they were destined to be together. So they decided to start a serious relationship. 2 years later, Mike and Missy moved to Key Largo, where they bought a spacious house in May 1990. They got married in a small ceremony in their backyard. Everyone who witnessed their marriage agreed that they were a perfect couple. Mike was healthy and successful, while Missy was beautiful, caring, and kind. They were both good people and had the potential to be wonderful parents. In January 1991, Missy found out she was pregnant. They began converting the living room into a nursery and were excited to plan every detail for their first child. The tropical storm hit the area in late August, bringing heavy rains and strong winds. Mike and Missy attended Lamaze classes together. They had chosen a name for their child and were looking forward to Missy giving birth naturally as soon as class ended. The sky darkened with ominous clouds, and lightning flashed in the distance. That Lamaze class would be the last time anyone saw Missy and Mike alive. The storm hit on the night of August 21st, and after it passed, everyone returned to their normal routines. Children began arriving at Key Largo Elementary School, and teachers discussed the terrible storm that had just occurred. However, Missy did not show up for work that day. Whenever she took a day off, she always called ahead to avoid worrying her students. Demonstrating her dedication to her job, Missy's absence was not only unusual, but also alarming. Worried, her colleagues called Missy's home, but no one answered. They continued to call Mike's sister, Sharon, to inquire about the situation after hearing the news. But Sharon called Missy's home, but no one answered her either. She tried again, but still, no one picked up. Strangely, even Mike and Missy's answering machine was not working. Sharon informed Missy's colleagues that she was unable to contact her, prompting them to visit Missy and Mike's home. The door was locked, and all the curtains were drawn except for one, which was only partially open, allowing the colleagues to catch a glimpse of the living room. They were shocked to find a person lying motionless on the floor, with only the person's feet visible. Her colleagues felt worried after witnessing such a disturbing scene through the window. Missy's neighbor then noticed something unusual and decided to check it out. When Missy's colleagues informed him about the situation inside the house, feeling that something was wrong, the neighbor decided to break down the door. When they entered the house, they found Mike lying on his back on the floor, his arms and legs spread out. His head was wrapped in tape. His mouth was also covered with tape, and white socks were placed in front of him. Shocked, they quickly called the police to report the incident. The police arrived promptly to investigate the scene. While searching the house, they found a shoe print on Mike's throat and a metal bar in the kitchen. The police believe the metal bar was the murder weapon and that the killer may have stomped on Mike's throat before killing him in the master bedroom. Missy's body was found. Her wrists were tied to her ankles with what appeared to be a clothesline, and a tie was wrapped tightly around her neck. 2 pieces of tape covered her eyes. Missy had been abused while she was pregnant and then strangled to death. In the following months, the townspeople began installing alarm systems and purchasing weapons, worried that they might be the next victims. Meanwhile, the police were trying to determine what had happened. They believed that the killer had cut the phone lines and entered Missy's house using a ladder left by a contractor. The timing of the attack during a storm allowed him to enter and exit the house undetected. Interestingly, the killer only had a metal bar with him and used items found in the house to tie up his victims. Suggesting that he was experienced, DNA was collected from the crime scene, including semen samples found on various parts of Missy's body. The results of the autopsy confirmed that both Mike and Missy died from strangulation. Mike suffered injuries from being struck with the metal bar, but he also had severe bruising on his abdomen, indicating that he had been kicked in the stomach. Additionally, his throat was severely damaged from being trampled. The strangulation marks on Missy's neck indicated that she had fought back for some time, forcing the killer to attempt multiple strangulation maneuvers before ultimately killing her. Tragically, her child, Kyle, died from a lack of oxygen in the womb during the attack. Police believe that Missy was the primary target and that the perpetrator may have known Mike. As a result, the police began questioning people she knew. Police eliminated 3 potential suspects after they volunteered to provide DNA samples. The police then noticed that some of Mike's business dealings did not appear to be entirely transparent. They discovered that Mike had made several trips to a notorious drug manufacturing center during the height of Miami's illegal drug trade. The police investigated Mike's business dealings, but ultimately, this investigation went nowhere. As there was no evidence that Mike was involved in any illegal activity, time passed without much progress. Then, unexpectedly, there was a breakthrough in the case. Renowned FBI psychologist Dale Hinman was brought in and used the available evidence to create a detailed psychological profile of the killer. She suggested that the killer may have a criminal record, that he knew at least some aspects of Missy's habits, and that he may have been obsessed with her. This was a major turning point in the investigation. A police officer has been trying to catch a suspect named Thomas Overton for years. Thomas is believed to be responsible for the attack and murder of a 20-year-old girl. The girl was last seen at a movie theater where Thomas worked, and her body was later discovered wrapped in a tarp with popcorn kernels nearby. Although the police suspect Thomas, there is no direct evidence linking him to the crime. Thomas later became the prime suspect in the murders of Missy and Mike. However, there is still no direct evidence linking him to their murders. On October 6, 1996, Thomas was arrested while committing an armed robbery and was imprisoned for this crime. He later injured himself in a failed escape attempt while being transported to prison. He asked the paramedics to provide him with gauze. The police collected DNA from the swab and compared it to evidence found at Missy's home, confirming his involvement in the crime. Shortly thereafter, Mike confessed to the murder. He had previously worked at a gas station that Missy often visited, and he had attempted to flirt with her, which she found offensive. She confided in others about the encounter, especially since she was 8 months pregnant at the time, the night before her death. Missy told Mike's sister, Sharon, that Mike had approached her again. This time, more aggressively. She had no idea that Mike had seen her address on a check she had written and had been stalking her for days. Thomas regularly visited Missy's home to spy on her. Revealing his disturbing obsession with her, he noticed contractors coming in to build a nursery for Missy's family on August 21st. During a storm, Thomas put on a mask, black military fatigues, and gloves, and went to Missy's house. He climbed a ladder to the nursery, opened the glass door, and quietly entered. At that time, Mike was in the kitchen and was probably unaware that Thomas was coming up behind him. Suddenly, Thomas hit Mike on the head with a metal bar, causing Mike to instinctively fight back a struggle broke out, but Thomas eventually overpowered Mike and strangled him to death during this attack. Missy entered the room, saw what was happening, screamed, and ran to her bedroom. Thomas followed her, and in his confession, he claimed that she begged for her life and tried to tell him that she was pregnant. However, her words had no effect on him. He then killed Missy and abused her. The trial of Thomas Overton began on October 17, 1998. Prosecutors presented new evidence, including photos of Missy's pregnant belly that Thomas took after she was killed during the trial. Thomas smiled and gestured towards Mike and Missy's family throughout the proceedings. He remained cold and cruel, seemingly enjoying the attention and considering himself a victor. Despite the overwhelming evidence of his guilt, on March 18, 1999, Thomas Overton was sentenced to death for the murders of Mike and Missy MacIvor. He is currently on death row and has shown no remorse for his actions. Mike's parents died shortly after his death. Unable to cope with the loss, Mike's sister, Sharon, described Thomas as the embodiment of evil. Hello, everyone. Today we will learn about another case. The case of Barbara Maybe Abel. There are books and films that help teach ways to confront criminals and appropriate behavior during kidnappings or critical situations. However, reading about these scenarios and actually experiencing them are two different things. Barbara Abel fully realized this when one of the most dangerous criminals in the U.S. showed up at her doorstep. On November 14, 1974, a scared Dale ran to his neighbor's house and began knocking frantically on the door. When the neighbor opened it, he found the boy covered in blood with strange marks on his ankles. Dale explained that the marks were from ropes used by an unknown man who had tied him and his Aunt Beverly while his mother, Barbara, was kidnapped. The neighbor quickly called 911. When the police arrived at the Abel family's home, it looked like a crime scene. There was blood everywhere, and the neighbor noted that Barbara's car was missing, along with her. Dale assisted the detectives by providing details about his mother, 31-year-old Barbara Maybe Abel, who had a twin sister named Beverly, who had been diagnosed with cerebral palsy. The twin sisters shared a deep bond from childhood. Barbara consistently supported and cared for Beverly. As they grew older, their relationship became stronger, with Barbara always striving to improve Beverly's quality of life and help her manage daily challenges. Barbara was smart, cheerful, and serious when necessary. After their father passed away, young Barbara took on many household responsibilities to help her mother. Throughout her life, she maintained a positive outlook and supported her loved ones during tough times. In April 1968, she gave birth to her son, Dale, and felt immense joy as a new mother. However, she soon faced challenges, primarily due to her breakup with the baby's father. Their disagreements had begun about a year before Dale was born. Although they hoped Dale would help resolve their issues, things only got worse. Ultimately, Barbara chose to raise her son as a single mother, later reflecting that this was the right decision for both of them, as it allowed her to create a stable environment for herself and her child. Unfortunately, the family faced a series of challenges. In May 1974, their mother passed away from an illness, leaving them in shock. It felt as if their world had collapsed. Their family had always been very close, so their mother's death deeply affected both Barbara and Beverly. Despite their grief, they tried to maintain a normal environment for the younger generation. Barbara worked diligently, writing and taking a job at a radio station, while Beverly managed household chores. They lived in a modest home in Palm Beach, Florida, and surrounded 6-year-old Dale with love and care, gradually recovering from this tragedy. On November 14, 1974, it seemed like an ordinary day for the Abel family. Beverly assisted Barbara in getting ready for work, and Dale was preparing for school. After dropping Dale off, Barbara went to the radio station where she worked as a news editor. Around noon, she tried to call Beverly, who was at home, but there was no answer. This was strange because Beverly never missed calls. She was always eager to talk. but this time she didn't even call back. Initially, Barbara thought her sister might have fallen asleep and didn't think much of it, so she continued with her work. After leaving the radio station around 5 p.m., she picked up Dale and headed home, expecting to see her sister there. As soon as they entered, she called Beverly, but there was no answer. Barbara asked her son to find his aunt, thinking she might have been listening to music and hadn't heard them come home. While Barbara went to the kitchen, she felt a sudden and intense fear that sent a chill down her spine. It was a deep, instinctual dread, and in that moment, she heard a voice say, "Don't turn around or I'll attack." Just then, her son Dale rushed into the kitchen and said that his aunt was in the bedroom and bleeding. When Barbara turned around, she saw a man pointing a weapon at her and Dale. Staying calm, she told the intruder that she needed to see her twin sister because she was worried about her. This was a risky move, but it seemed to impress the man, who agreed to let her see her sister. With the weapon still aimed at them, Barbara and Dale cautiously walked toward the bedroom, trying to keep Dale away from the armed man. Beverly was in the bedroom, lying on the bed with a gag in her mouth, crying. Barbara kissed her sister and whispered that everything would be all right. Barbara noticed that Beverly was undressed under the blanket. Unable to hold back her feelings, she confronted the attacker, questioning whether he had abused Beverly. He responded with laughter, claiming he had attempted to assault Beverly but had failed. His cruel smile and taunting words sent another chill down Barbara's spine. Following this, she tried to bribe the assailant. She revealed that she had a significant amount of money at home and was willing to give him her car keys. In return, she pleaded with him to leave them alone and not to harm them. The stranger, however, expressed his desire to take her child and reach for the boy. Barbara firmly declared that she would never give up her son and instead offered to take Dale's place. The man agreed. The assailant identified himself as Paul John Knowles and claimed he had just escaped from prison, stating he had no plans to return. He warned Barbara that he wouldn't harm her as long as she followed his orders exactly. Although Barbara knew he was lying and likely wouldn't let her go easily, she felt she had no good options left. Her primary concern was the safety of her son and her injured sister, who needed help. However, Paul was determined to keep them as hostages to buy time for his escape. He tightly bound Dale's and Beverly's hands and feet on the bed. Barbara was horrified at the thought of leaving her loved ones in such a vulnerable state, but she realized that any resistance could endanger their lives. Throughout this terrifying situation, she remained calm, speaking to her family as if everything was normal, reassuring them that it would all be over soon and that they would be all right. This approach worked. She managed to soothe her child and keep the kidnapper from becoming agitated. Barbara emphasized that they should not provoke Paul, as she had no way of knowing his true intentions. Her goal was to lead the attacker far away from her home and loved ones, then find a way to escape and alert the authorities. Paul accepted the offered money and car keys. He pointed the weapon at Barbara, then got into the car and drove away. Throughout this time, Barbara was primarily concerned about her family. More than 30 minutes later, Dale escaped and sought help. The police responded to the call. They found an abandoned car near the house, which was the vehicle used by the kidnapper. The car was registered in one state, but its license plate had been stolen from another location. Investigations revealed that the car had been stolen from a man named William Bates a couple of months earlier. Eventually, William's body was discovered, strangled, in Ohio. Inside the car's glove compartment, detectives discovered numerous credit cards and insurance policies, the majority of which belonged to Carswell Carr. The man had become a victim of a double homicide along with his 15-year-old daughter, Amanda, just days before Barbara's kidnapping. The tragedy at the Carr home in Milledgeville, Georgia, was one of the most horrifying scenes the investigators had ever witnessed. A 15-year-old girl had been brutally strangled, and her father had suffered around 30 stab wounds. It was evident that the perpetrator was a dangerous individual, prepared to kill anyone who interfered. On November 6, 1974, the Carr home, located almost 7 kilometers from where Barbara lived, was found ransacked. Inside the car, discovered near the home of Barbara, a will belonging to a man named Paul John Knowles was also found. Once law enforcement checked their database, they identified Paul as an escaped serial killer. Authorities linked him to at least 35 murders across the United States. He traveled aimlessly, leaving behind trails of blood and bodies, completely indifferent to the consequences of his actions. He selected his victims randomly, unlike most psychopaths, who usually target a specific type. He took lives with the same pleasure, whether the victim was a child or an adult. He left behind a lot of evidence, but there were no hints about his next actions. Meanwhile, Barbara and Paul were driving a Barbara's car when he discovered he was wanted by the police. He forced Barbara to change the radio station. She complied and noticed that he seemed to expect the news to be on all channels, while others remained quiet, which frustrated him. At that moment, she was still unaware of his true nature. Suddenly, he confessed to having killed several people. This made Barbara uncomfortable, so she tried to change the topic to distract him from his violent past by discussing the weather, movies, or anything unrelated. Despite her attempts, he continued to casually mention his killings. Barbara began to act flirtatiously, realizing that her femininity might be her only chance for escape. Barbara decided to try to win him over. She called him sweet and offered him a cigarette. When Paul asked why she was being so nice, Barbara replied that she didn't believe he was a bad person, and even said he reminded her of the famous actor Robert Redford. This seemed to work. After the comparison, Paul became much more responsive, calm, and easier to talk to. They continued their conversation as if nothing bad had happened, as if they were simply on a date. Paul asked Barbara what she did for a living. She replied that she was a news editor on the radio and dreamed of writing a book. This excited Paul, who seemed genuinely interested in her ambitions, especially the idea that she could write a book about him. He expressed a desire to become famous, mentioning that he wanted the book's proceeds to go to his mother, but he didn't specify how he planned to achieve that fame. He repeatedly claimed to have killed many times. Although she was terrified, Barbara tried to hide her fear and remain calm. At one point, she realized that her only chance to escape was to push Paul out of the moving car, but she couldn't summon the strength or courage to do it. Barbara understood that if the investigators discovered who she was with, they would likely conclude that she was already dead. Paul was a ruthless predator with an insatiable thirst for killing. He was unpredictable and armed, which made him extremely dangerous. The most frightening aspect was that they were in an unknown location, and she had no idea where Paul was taking her. The detectives discovered that he was traveling between different states, often switching cars, and that his attacks consistently resulted in death. Occasionally, he took hostages, all of whom ended up dead. The chances of Barbara surviving her abduction were deemed very slim, but her family and friends refused to give up hope. They believed she could still be found alive. Law enforcement officials realized they had to act quickly because with every minute that passed, the likelihood of rescuing Barbara decreased. A search perimeter was set up on the roads in West Palm Beach, along with checkpoints. Authorities announced plans to intercept the suspect, Paul, focusing on Barbara's distinctive golden vehicle. However, detectives were unaware that they were too late. Paul had already taken Barbara beyond the checkpoints. Paul arrived with Barbara at a motel in Fort Pierce, about 100 kilometers from the scene of the abduction. He intended to rest there for the night and had no plans to release Barbara. To avoid suspicion, they registered as Mr. and Mrs. Smith, pretending to be on their honeymoon. Barbara felt that the hotel receptionist was suspicious of them based on her gaze. Meanwhile, she knew that Paul was carrying a weapon at his waist. To allay the receptionist's suspicions, Barbara embraced Paul and acted like a loving wife. This successfully convinced the administrator, who then handed them the key to the room. As soon as they entered the room, Paul ordered Barbara to take off her clothes. Barbara felt scared and protested, saying she was too tired but Paul ignored her and insisted she comply. While the criminal was trying to do his dirty deed, she thought of everything that came to mind about her son and sister in order to detach herself from what was happening, but at first, she couldn't manage it. Paul grew frustrated and angry, becoming aggressive toward her. Sensing his loss of control, Barbara calmly asked him what he was trying to accomplish, which helped ease his anger momentarily. However, he later abused her. At one point, he shared with her that he had two personalities, referring to them as Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, explaining his frequent mood changes. Barbara found it hard to predict his rapid shifts in temperament. After a brief period of calm, Paul suddenly ripped the bedsheets, tied Barbara up with them, and threw her onto the bed before turning on the television. Exhausted both mentally and physically, she eventually fell asleep. In her dreams, Barbara saw her deceased mother, who reassured her that everything would be fine. At that moment, Barbara understood it was a sign and resolved to do whatever it took to save herself. While she slept, she heard news reports and saw Paul intently watching a broadcast that displayed her photographs alongside those of Paul. His identity had already been established. They also reported on other crimes committed by Paul that were known at that time. Barbara was horrified. She understood that her chances of rescue were extremely low. Meanwhile, Paul reveled in the attention he was receiving from the media. Barbara recognized that he desperately wanted to become famous. Later, Paul went to sleep, tying his leg to Barbara's to prevent her from escaping. By November 15, the police still had no leads on her whereabouts. The search for Paul had escalated to a national scale. Headlines in all newspapers and on television shouted that the most dangerous criminal in the country was killing again. Barbara woke up in the morning next to Paul. She had barely slept the entire night, terrified to be tied to one of America's most wanted criminals. Paul took her to the nearest diner for breakfast. While he eagerly devoured scrambled eggs, toast, pancakes, and orange juice, Barbara couldn't eat anything. She glanced around nervously, hoping someone would recognize her, while also looking for ways to escape. However, she quickly noticed that Paul's weapon was aimed at her. He warned her not to make any sudden movements. To her dismay, she realized that no one seemed to recognize them, despite the extensive news coverage and radio alerts. Barbara understood that she couldn't rely on anyone for help. She was too scared to scream or ask for assistance, fearing it would only worsen her situation. She decided to keep playing her role, believing it would save her life. She buried her face in the plate and had a small breakfast. Afterward, Paul and Barbara returned to the motel, where he abused her again. Initially, she fought back, which only fueled his anger. At one point, Barbara feared for her life, believing he might not stop in his rage. However, she managed to save herself once more by employing her understanding and psychological tactics. She stayed calm, engaged him in conversation, and successfully avoided a violent outcome for the second time. During their dialogue, Paul mentioned that he wanted to get to know Barbara before everything changed, clearly referring to his criminal actions. Thus, she realized that she had found a way to connect with him, and her chances of a positive outcome immediately increased. Later, Paul tied her to the bed again and stepped out to make a phone call. Barbara struggled to free herself, but was unsuccessful. Then she noticed a key on the nightstand. It appeared that Paul had hastily closed the door and locked it. Oddly, it seemed as if he had done this intentionally, perhaps to protect her from himself. A few minutes later, he began banging on the door from the outside. Barbara waited in silence, her heart racing. Through the door, he told her that he knew she couldn't speak because of the gag in her mouth. He urged her not to tell the police that Paul had hurt her, claiming he never meant to harm her and was sorry for what had happened. His final words were, "I love you, and I'm leaving." After that, the sounds outside faded away. He had truly left. At first, Barbara was too scared to move. She didn't scream or call for help, fearing he was still outside, waiting for a reason to hurt her. She wondered if he had said those things to test her, as if she needed to prove something. However, she also realized that if she waited too long, he might change his mind, and she would miss her chance to escape. Finally, Barbara managed to free herself using the sharp edge of a piece of glass from the nightstand. She quickly called the front desk, telling them that a serial killer had kidnapped her, then hung up. The administrator alerted the police and requested assistance. A few minutes later, police officers opened the door. After her release, Barbara immediately called Beverly to hear the voices of both her sister and her son. They were overjoyed that she had managed to escape. However, despite the happy reunion, Barbara was still troubled by the fact that Paul was still at large and could return to harm her. Her nightmare could not truly end as long as he remained free. Fortunately, she did not suffer serious physical injuries during her kidnapping, but the psychological effects left her deeply affected. Barbara experienced post-traumatic stress disorder for a long time. She credited her faith in God for helping her family heal and chose to forgive Paul in order to find peace moving forward. By November 17, law enforcement had learned that a patrol officer, Charles Campbell, was missing and suspected he might have been abducted by Paul. The officer had attempted to stop a vehicle and approach the driver's window, but he was too late and saw a weapon aimed at Charles. Paul kidnapped Charles and took the patrol car, leaving behind Barbara's car. Shortly after, the police vehicle was found abandoned on the roadside while Paul was trying to stop another driver, James Mayer. Now, Paul had two hostages, whom he later transferred to another vehicle after killing the driver. About 100 kilometers into Georgia, a gas station employee noticed a man in uniform acting strangely in the back seat of one of the vehicles that had pulled in. He promptly alerted emergency services. After the vehicle left, the employee reported his observations, which helped law enforcement identify the car and its location. They initiated a chase and managed to intercept the vehicle. However, Paul refused to stop, even with flat tires. Driving on flat tires didn't last long. He lost control and crashed into a barrier. Paul abandoned the vehicle and fled into the woods. The police chased him closely, and explosions were heard from the forest. Despite this, Paul managed to escape again. The following day, a hunter saw Paul in the woods. He noticed that Paul was injured and reported the sighting to the authorities. Eventually, Paul was captured and refused to reveal the location of Charles and James, the driver of a stolen car. On December 18, about a month after their abduction, they were found tied to a tree in Georgia, both dead from wounds inflicted by a weapon. News of Paul, the most dangerous serial killer, spread on television, bringing relief to Barbara and her family. She had spent over a day in captivity and fully realized the threat the detectives were facing. Barbara remembered that he had escaped from prison before and feared it could happen again, leaving her and her family feeling unsafe for a while. They moved in with relatives, but this offered little comfort to Barbara. Barbara understood that she could only find peace if Paul could never harm anyone again. During this time, she faced significant psychological struggles. On the way to prison, Paul had a devious plan in mind. He was placed in the sheriff's car, and they drove to the location. The driver and accompanying officer were unaware that Paul had a paperclip with him. During the drive, Paul waited for a moment when the officers were distracted and managed to pick the lock on his handcuffs. A struggle broke out, and he seized the officer's weapon. Fortunately, the sheriff reacted quickly. He attacked Paul, emptying his entire magazine, realizing that both were in mortal danger and only decisive action could save their lives. Paul had died. This news brought immense relief to Barbara, her family, and many others who had been anxiously following the villain's actions across the country. Finally, he could no longer pose a threat, allowing everyone to breathe a sigh of relief. After much contemplation, Barbara ultimately decided to stay in her home instead of moving. Although she was going through a difficult time, the house held memories of her mother and the joyful moments of her childhood. Among these memories was her miraculous escape from one of the most dangerous serial killers in the U.S. during the 1970s. As she worked to heal from her trauma, Barbara married Jim Abel. Despite the challenges she faced, including surviving cancer, she raised Dale. Motivated by her experiences and perhaps Paul's quest for notoriety, Barbara wrote a book detailing her abduction from her own perspective. She vividly described the horrors she faced with the killer and focused on the strategies she used to escape the fate that befell many of his victims. Sadly, her sister Beverly, who passed away from cancer in 2019, never had the chance to read Barbara's book, published in 2021, but Beverly was involved in the early stages of its creation and supported her sister throughout the process. As it turned out, besides Barbara, there was another survivor named Sandy Fox, who was also a writer. There is a theory that Paul intentionally left these two women alive so they could write books about him and make him famous.
On April 16, 2024, just after 11 a.m., in a quiet apartment building in Iztacalco, Mexico City, the sun shone brightly and the streets were peaceful. Inside one of the apartments, a teenage girl was finishing her schoolwork while her mother ran a quick errand. Everything seemed normal, but someone was watching someone familiar with the apartment's layout and who had been there before. What happened in the following minutes would profoundly impact the community and reveal a hidden nightmare that had persisted for over a decade. This marked the beginning of a shocking revelation. In April 2024, 17-year-old Maria Jose Castillo Calles was living a peaceful life in Mexico City with her mother, Cassandra Calles. They had recently settled into a modest apartment in the Iztacalco borough. Maria was a kind, compassionate girl with a love for motorcycles and animals, especially her cherished dogs. Neighbors described her as polite, calm, and dedicated to her studies. She rarely went out, spending most of her time focused on schoolwork and preparing for her university entrance exams. Her dream was to study international business, build a successful career, and one day provide financial support for her mother. However, someone had been watching her. Maria Jose and her mother, Cassandra Calles, were unaware that a man had been entering their apartment multiple times. It's unclear whether he used a hidden key or entered through a window, but he clearly knew their daily routine well. On the morning of April 16th, Cassandra left to run errands, not realizing it would be the last time she saw her daughter alive. Security footage later released to the media showed Cassandra walking down the street with the man following closely behind, waiting for the right moment to act. Meanwhile, Maria was in her bedroom doing homework when her stalker walked in. She screamed for help, alerting the neighbors, but he quickly overpowered her and brutally stabbed her multiple times. Cassandra sensed something was wrong and returned home early, only to find a shocking scene: her daughter lying lifeless on the floor, with an attacker still present, assaulting her. Before Cassandra could react, the man lunged at her, stabbing her multiple times. Despite her injuries, she was able to call for help. Neighbors who heard the earlier screams quickly came to assist. Some confronted the attacker, while others helped Cassandra and called emergency services. The police arrived swiftly, rescuing the suspect from an angry mob of residents. Paramedics confirmed that Maria was dead, and Cassandra was taken to the hospital in critical condition. The suspect is Miguel Cortez Miranda, a 39-year-old man who had lived in the same building for over 10 years. On the surface, Miguel appeared to lead a normal life. He was born in Mexico City on October 25, 1984, as the youngest child of a homemaker and a university professor in microbiology. From a young age, Miguel showed both exceptional intelligence and troubling behavior, including experimenting with chemicals on cars, household items, and later, animals. In school, he studied to be a bacteriological chemist and parasitologist, and later graduated from the National School of Biological Sciences and the Instituto Politécnico Nacional. By 2008, he secured a job in a laboratory where he analyzed food and water. He graduated with honors and worked for reputable companies, earning a solid reputation as a professional by his mid-20s. However, hidden beneath his polished appearance was a darker side. Miguel posted on social media images of cemeteries, skulls, preserved animals. He shared unsettling jokes and wrote poetry about death and spiritual pain. In 2014, he transformed into an avant-garde artist, leaving his previous career behind. He acted in independent theater, frequently taking on roles of the deceased, and became active in vegan and animal rights movements. While neighbors considered him eccentric yet harmless, they were mistaken. Investigators made a troubling discovery while looking into Maria José's case. She was not the only victim of Miguel. Authorities conducted searches on 3 properties related to him. In his apartment, they found disturbing evidence: surgical tools, saws, human bones, blood-stained items, and a container holding the remains of at least 20 different people. Along with these remains were IDs and personal belongings, predominantly belonging to women. Even more unsettling were 3 handwritten notebooks, which Miguel had used to detail his crimes. These entries dated back to 2012, indicating a pattern of horror that lasted over a decade. Many of the potential victims were believed to be missing students or escorts associated with Miguel. Over the years, forensic teams began the slow task of identifying the remains through genetic testing. The revelations stunned the nation. Miguel, once seen as an educated, quiet man with a curious mind, was now at the center of one of the most grotesque crime cases in modern Mexico. Leaked pages from his journals hinted at past trauma, including alleged abuse by his father. While some reports claimed his mother and sister ignored his suffering, his sister publicly denied this, though she did acknowledge that both siblings had endured a violent upbringing. In the days following the arrest of Miguel, silence from authorities gave way to a wave of speculation. The media quickly dubbed him the monster of Iztacalco and Dahmer Mexican, comparing his crimes to those of the infamous Jeffrey Dahmer, an American serial killer who murdered 17 young men and kept their remains in his apartment for years without detection. Local officials referred to him simply as the feminicidal killer. As journalists began to investigate further, unsettling details about Miguel's online presence surfaced on social media. He had long been posting disturbing poetry, some of which, in hindsight, appeared to describe his crimes in abstract artistic language. Hidden behind a facade of intellectualism and eccentricity, Miguel had managed to avoid suspicion for over a decade. The most disturbing revelation came when a crime reporter leaked video footage of his first court appearance. In it, Miguel appeared calm, even smiling, as he listened to the charges. During the hearing, he confessed in graphic detail to the murder of Maria José. He explained that on the day of the attack, he believed the apartment was empty. It was not his first time breaking in. When Maria José unexpectedly spotted him, she screamed for help. He claimed he asked her to stop, and when she didn't, something in him snapped. He described entering a state of frenzy and attacking her violently. He also admitted that after Cassandra returned home, he intended to kill her too. Following his confession, the court charged Miguel with the gender-based murder of Maria José and attempted murder for the brutal attack on Cassandra. He was ordered to remain in prison as the investigation expanded outside the courtroom. Grief turned to outrage. Friends, classmates, and neighbors gathered outside the apartment complex to hold a memorial mass and built an altar in Maria José's honor. The call for justice grew louder. Families of other missing women came forward, demanding that authorities identify the remains found in Miguel's home. Soon, long-forgotten names and heartbreaking stories resurfaced. For many, it had been years since they last saw their daughters, sisters, or friends. On May 3, 2024, the Attorney General of Mexico City confirmed what many feared. DNA results had identified several of the victims. Among them were Amirani Roblero Gonzalez, 18, Karen Ornelas Balzataz, 21, Frida Sofia Lima Rivera, 32, Viviana Elizabeth Garrido Ibarra, 32, Claudia Andrea A., 36, Norma Elena O., 41, Cynthia Vanessa E., 39, and Laura V., 33. Each of these women had disappeared at different times over the last 10 years. Their confirmed deaths revealed the massive scope of Miguel's atrocities and raised a terrifying question. How had this predator gone unnoticed for so long? As the media swarmed the story, one victim's identity, Frida Sofia Lima Rivera, was verified by the discovery of her skull. But this was far from the last revelation. Authorities began investigating whether Miguel, using his background in chemistry, had found ways to preserve more bodies. Experts feared that many more victims could be hidden in storage or elsewhere, their identities still unknown. With the identification of known victims, the timeline of Miguel's murders started to take shape. Investigators think that his first verified murder took place in 2012. The victim was Amirani Roblero Gonzalez, an intelligent and athletic 18-year-old who was born in Mexico City on December 26, 1993. Amirani was the third of 4 children in a diligent family. In 2012, she had just finished her studies in business administration and was getting ready to go to university to study engineering. On August 1st of that year, she left home to attend a preparatory course and intended to pick up her graduation photos. She never came back. Her disappearance was reported the following day, but instead of being taken seriously, the authorities dismissed the case. Officers joked that she likely ran off with a boyfriend. From the moment her family reported her missing, crucial mistakes were made. By the time investigators requested it, security footage from nearby cameras had already been erased. Phone records, which could have helped track her last known movements, were not obtained because telecommunications companies did not cooperate. Additionally, the official missing person bulletin had inaccuracies, particularly regarding her age, which caused confusion and slowed down the search efforts. Authorities discovered that Amirani had been in contact with Miguel, who was with her on the day she went missing to collect graduation photos. However, he was quickly ruled out as a suspect due to his reputation as a respected young professional, which seemed to protect him unfairly. While the Amirani's family endured their suffering, Miguel continued to lead a double life. In December 2012, just a few months later, Miguel targeted his next victim, 21-year-old Karen Ornelas Baltazar, a clinical lab technician. At that time, Karen was studying pharmaceutical chemistry at the Instituto Politécnico Nacional. Miguel, who was her supervisor at the laboratory, showed an inappropriate interest in her. Karen brushed off his advances, but her boyfriend felt that something was wrong with Miguel, a concern that would sadly turn out to be true. On December 1, 2012, Miguel planned a surprise birthday party for Karen at his apartment. Friends and co-workers attended the celebration. Not knowing about the plans Miguel had, Karen spent the evening with a few colleagues and decided to go home early the next morning. Miguel offered to accompany her to the metro station but returned alone later that day and did not explain where she had gone. The following day, Karen was reported missing. Suspicion quickly turned to Miguel, the last person known to have seen Karen alive. Days later, her body was discovered. The autopsy determined that she died from bronchoaspiration, caused by alcohol intoxication, but her family did not believe this explanation. Karen's body had multiple bruises, which the police attributed to a fall. Her family was left with lingering questions and a growing sense that something much more troubling had occurred. Miguel attended Karen's funeral, where he acted politely and expressed his condolences to her grieving family. No one suspected that the killer was there among them. He managed to keep up his pretense long enough to choose his third victim, Frida Sofia Lima Rivera. Frida was a 32-year-old from a large family struggling financially. She moved to Mexico City to pursue her dream of studying industrial administration at the Instituto Politécnico Nacional. Fortunately, she became neighbors with Miguel. Miguel quickly gained Frida's trust, and their friends noticed a strong bond between them, leading some to speculate about a potential romance. However, Frida viewed Miguel as a mentor who was helping her navigate the challenges of city life and academic pressures. In early 2013, Miguel's behavior changed dramatically. He quit his job at the lab, stopped posting emotional updates on social media, and began focusing on new interests. He adopted a vegan lifestyle, became involved in animal rights activism, and distanced himself from his former friends. By February 2014, after returning from a solitary trip in the mountains, Miguel appeared revitalized and focused, though investigators would later uncover that he was preparing for something much darker. In December 2014, Frida disappeared. Her last known online activity was on December 7th. Due to her family's remote location in Moros, with limited communication, they didn't realize she was missing until February 2015. Frida's sister and their mother went to Mexico City to report her missing. Unfortunately, the authorities were dismissive, suggesting that Frida might have run away with a boyfriend. With no help from the police, her family attempted to search for her on their own, but after several months without any progress and running out of resources, they had to go back home. Miguel, who was the main suspect, pretended to offer support and sympathy while remaining under suspicion. The police did nothing with the only significant clue, phone records showing that Miguel had called Frida's phone number. As time went on, each visit from Frida's family to the police resulted in silence and empty promises, while Miguel continued his life without any interruptions. In September 2018, he began working at a quality control lab, where he met his fourth known victim, Viviana Elizabeth Garrido Ibarra. Viviana was a 32-year-old biochemical engineer and a mother to a 9-year-old girl. She admired Miguel's professionalism, and they developed a connection. However, less than 3 months later, she disappeared. On November 30th, 2018, Viviana said goodbye to a co-worker after finishing her shift and headed to the metro, but she never returned home. Her disappearance prompted serious police investigations, and several of her co-workers, including Miguel, were questioned. Yet, like in earlier cases, he managed to avoid suspicion. Despite his connection to multiple missing women, he remained undetected. This raised a troubling question. Was it due to police incompetence, or had Miguel become an expert at deception? In 2019, a year later, Miguel switched jobs once more and started working at a well-known private hospital's lab. It was there that he reconnected with Claudia Andrea a former colleague who would later become his fifth victim. Their professional relationship soon turned romantic, and Claudia frequently shared their happy moments on social media, smiling for the camera, unaware of the horrific fate that lay ahead for her. On December 27, 2019, Claudia disappeared on her 36th birthday after making plans for a celebration with Miguel. Concerned when they hadn't heard from her, her brother and their mother went to her apartment. They found the door unlocked, towels stuffed under the frame, and discovered Claudia's decomposing body in her bed. The initial forensic report indicated she died from respiratory failure, but her family had doubts. The messy state of the apartment, the makeshift measures to cover up the smell, and Claudia's relationship with Miguel raised significant questions. Despite their concerns, the police decided not to investigate further and closed the case. On December 31st, Claudia was buried, but shortly after, suspicious transactions appeared on her bank account between January 1st and 2nd, 2020. Additionally, several of her personal items, including her ID and phone, went missing. This situation led her family to request that the investigation be reopened. Investigators stated they were reviewing security footage, but interest in the case quickly diminished. Meanwhile, Miguel returned to living quietly in his apartment. The indifference of the system became his strongest ally. In April 2024, a violent attack on Maria Jose and her mother, Cassandra, led to a significant breakthrough. The arrest of Miguel revealed his troubling history, prompting investigators to piece together the evidence against him. This development rekindled hope for the families of his earlier victims, who had felt silenced for too long. Cassandra, the sole survivor of Miguel's assaults, slowly healed from her injuries. In interviews with the local media, she recounted her terrifying experience from that unforgettable April morning. By early 2025, authorities projected that Miguel's victim count could be at least 20. However, even with the shocking evidence and public outcry, updates from officials have been rare. The investigation is still ongoing, and a trial date has yet to be announced. The journey toward justice is long and uncertain. For now, families hold on to hope that the man who has escaped justice for over a decade will finally be held accountable. Their voices, once drowned out by bureaucracy and apathy, are now growing stronger. The case of Miguel Ángel Cortés is no longer just about a serial predator. It highlights the failures of a system that has ignored these issues for too long. For the victims, this narrative is not just about their deaths, but about ensuring they are never forgotten. In an unexpected turn of events, on the morning of April 13, 2025, Miguel Cortés Miranda was found on the floor of his cell at Reclusorio Oriente and was immediately taken to Iztapalapa General Hospital, where he died. His cause of death was ruled to be cardiac arrest due to a prescription drug overdose, aggravated by head trauma when he fell from his bunk bed. Due to his sudden death, Mexican authorities opened an investigation to determine if there was anything suspicious surrounding the incident. At the time of his death, Miguel was scheduled to appear in court and was under investigation for making phone calls to the victim's relatives. Due to his death, investigations into his case were discontinued. The sudden death of Miguel Cortés Miranda may have closed a dark chapter, but it left countless questions unanswered and wounds unhealed. For the families of Maria José, Amairani, Karen, Frida, Viviana, Claudia, and others, the loss remains a haunting reminder of a predator who thrived in the shadows of systemic neglect. While their voices now echo louder, demanding accountability and reform, the fight for justice continues, not only to honor the memory of those taken, but to ensure such horrors are never overlooked again. This case, etched in Mexico's collective consciousness, stands as both a tragedy and a call to action, urging society to confront the failures that allowed a monster to hide in plain sight for far too long.
Sweet, tender feelings can quickly turn into frustration, disappointment, even outright hatred. In those cases, the most reasonable thing to do is end the relationship. When large sums of money and the temptation of quick riches are involved, the life of a person can be at risk. Gary Bentley's situation is not unusual. There have been cases where people have been harmed over much less. In this case, however, the killer was motivated by the prospect of gaining $1 million and achieving a life of comfort. Did Gary suspect that something terrible might happen? His parents believe he did. They had a bad feeling about his situation and were worried for his safety, trying to protect him. However, Gary couldn't believe that the love of his life, the mother of his child, could actually commit murder. He fought hard to salvage his failing marriage for the sake of his son, but ultimately, he lost his life, leaving the boy an orphan, even though his mother was still alive. Gary Wayne Bentley was born on August 31, 1984, in Louisville, Jefferson County, Kentucky. He was the youngest of 2 children in the Bentley family, with an older sister named Amy. From a young age, Gary and Amy shared a close and trusting bond. The Bentley family operated their own farm and worked diligently to provide for their children, ensuring they received a quality education. The children actively participated in the farm work, contributing to the family's efforts. Overall, the Bentley family was close-knit, offering each other care and support. From a young age, Gary was very close to his dad, Gerald. They enjoyed spending time together, often going fishing, hunting, and camping. Gerald taught Gary important skills, including how to handle a gun, navigate the wilderness, identify edible mushrooms and berries. As a teenager, Gary became seriously interested in firearms, learning to use them proficiently and eventually starting a collection. Almost every weekend, he and his dad would go hunting or fishing together, solidifying their bond as best friends. Those who knew him described him as kind, easygoing, always ready to help others. He excelled in school, avoided negative influences, maintained good habits, and never encountered legal trouble. Gary was a quiet and home-loving young man who prioritized his family. After high school, Gary attended college in Frankfurt, the state capital, where he studied engineering. Upon graduating, he returned to his hometown of Louisville and began his career as a basic electrician, rapidly advancing in his profession. In college, Gary met Tasha, who became the love of his life. She was about a year and a half older than him, but that age difference didn't matter to them. They began dating soon after meeting, and in 2006, they moved in together near Gary's parents' home. Tasha was studying nursing. After earning her degree, she got a job at a city hospital, where she quickly gained the respect and admiration of her colleagues. However, she didn't stop there. She continued her education and worked hard to advance her career. In 2012, Gary and Tasha celebrated their love with a large wedding, inviting all their family and friends. Shortly after, Tasha became pregnant. They was filled with joy. In the spring of 2013, they welcomed their baby boy, Connor. By this time, both Gary and Tasha were successful in their careers, earning good money. This allowed them to move into a larger, more comfortable home, buy 2 cars, travel, and enjoy life without financial worries. Gary dreamed of having a big family and wanted at least 2 more children with Tasha. However, just a few years later, their happiness began to fade. The first 4 years of their marriage were ideal. Others admired them as a perfect couple. They held respected, well-paying jobs, were wonderful parents, good friends. They frequently hosted parties at their home for family and close friends, were always eager to assist anyone in need. Gary's parents, Gerald and Lisa, were thrilled with their daughter-in-law and grandson. In 2016, the Bentley marriage began to face significant challenges. Their relationship started to suffer when Tasha encountered unexpected difficulties at work. She frequently expressed frustration about her co-workers, her boss, and the difficult working environment. Gary tried to support her, but he cautioned her against quitting her job too hastily, as finding another position with a decent salary would be challenging. In the fall of 2016, they wanted to reduce stress, so they decided to go on vacation. They left their son with Gary's parents and flew to a resort in Jamaica with their close friends, Amy Day and Kevin. The first few days were wonderful. They enjoyed the beach, explored the island, and had a great time together. However, Tasha appeared distracted. She constantly texted someone, became defensive when anyone asked about it. As the trip continued, arguments between Gary and Tasha grew more frequent. Their friends noticed that the fight seemed to start unexpectedly and quickly escalated, making Amy and Kevin feel uncomfortable. Soon after returning home from vacation, Tasha informed Gary that she had quit her job. Gary was concerned about her decision, as losing a stable income could negatively impact their family finances. However, being responsible and frugal, he had some savings that would help them maintain their lifestyle until Tasha found another job. Remarkably, just a day after quitting, Tasha was offered a consulting position at a large pharmaceutical company. This left Gary puzzled since she had not mentioned searching for a job prior to resigning. It seemed possible that someone had assisted her in securing this position, but Tasha dismissed it as luck, insisting that she had stumbled upon the interview by chance. Tasha appeared to be content with her new job, but her home life took a turn for the worse. She was often absent, stopped cooking, neglected household chores, and seemed uninterested in Gary's life. Most concerning was her lack of attention to their son, leaving much of the parenting responsibilities to his grandparents on weekends. Mrs. Bentley began traveling frequently, citing work trips as the reason. She was often on her phone, searching for private places to talk, and when questioned, she maintained that her calls were work-related, needing to discuss things with colleagues or bosses. Additionally, she added a password to her phone, something she had never done before, to keep it private. Her behavior became increasingly secretive and detached. Gary dedicated himself to their son, giving him all his love and attention. He lived for the boy, spending his free time with him and doing everything he could to make sure Connor felt loved, despite the ongoing arguments and Tasha's lack of concern. Gary still loved Tasha and wished to salvage their marriage, primarily for their son's benefit. Noticing the increasing tension in their son's family, Gary's parents decided to surprise him, Tasha, and their grandson with a trip to a beautiful resort in Mexico. They selected a cozy hotel in a quiet area, hoping it would create a peaceful setting for the family to reconnect and spend quality time together. The hotel had limited cell service, the internet was weak and frequently disconnected, encouraging the family to enjoy each other's company, relax on the beach, and take long walks. However, Tasha became increasingly frustrated by the lack of connectivity. She often attempted to make phone calls or find a signal to send messages, which led her to lash out at Gary and his parents, even yelling at their young son. Gerald, Gary's dad, noticed that Gary's behavior was unusual and felt it was time for an open conversation. He expressed his concern that Tasha might be unfaithful. Gary tried to brush it off with humor, but Gerald could see in his eyes that he shared the same worries while trying to act as if everything was okay. The couple fought daily, with Tasha insisting they cut their vacation short to address urgent work issues. Eventually, she packed her things and declared she would fly home alone. This forced the rest of the family to leave early with her, even though they had already paid for another week at the hotel and wouldn't receive any refunds. In the spring of 2017, Tasha called her father-in-law, Gerald, sounding upset. She told him that her car had caught fire at a gas station and was completely destroyed. She needed a ride to her insurance company and then back home. Gerald hurried to help her, but he felt uneasy about the situation. This was the third time since Tasha had been with Gary that one of her cars had mysteriously burned. Each time it happened at a gas station, leaving the vehicle in ruins and making it hard to find out the real cause of the fire. Each incident was blamed on faulty equipment at the gas station, and Tasha always received large insurance payouts. These fires seemed to occur approximately every 3 years, and Tasha would insure her cars for the maximum amount just before the fires, using different insurance companies each time. She claimed she didn't know how the fires happened. Some friends and family suspected she might have enemies sabotaging her cars. Nevertheless, after each incident, Tasha bought a newer, more expensive car, and the insurance companies had no valid reason to deny her claims, despite the suspicious pattern of the fires making it nearly impossible to prove deliberate damage. By the summer of 2017, Tasha began to disappear almost every weekend, claiming these absences were due to work trips. She became increasingly distant from Gary and their son, as if she were living a separate life. Friends, family, and even their neighbors started to suspect that Tasha was having an affair. These rumors deeply affected Gary. He stopped making jokes about the situation and would either remain silent or change the topic. Gary's parents tried multiple times to discuss this with him, emphasizing that things couldn't go on like this because their marriage seemed to be falling apart. However, Gary consistently insisted that he still loved Tasha, was determined to keep the family together for Connor's sake. He clung to the hope that Tasha would realize her mistakes, rethink her priorities, and that their life would return to how it used to be. In November 2017, Gary, Tasha, and their son visited his parents' house for Thanksgiving. Gary's sister Amy was there with her family too. When it was time to exchange gifts, Tasha revealed that she hadn't brought any. She explained that work had kept her too busy, promising to go out and buy some gifts quickly. However, she was gone for hours and returned without anything, not even a gift for her son. When everyone looked at her quizzically, she explained that the lines at the stores were too long and it would have taken her all night to wait. This time, Amy couldn't hold back. She pulled Gary aside, asked him point blank if he realized that Tasha was probably seeing someone else and wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. Gary simply responded that they would handle it themselves. The following weekend, Gary called his dad, asked him to come over with some tools. Gerald was glad to help and arrived at his son's house within half an hour with everything he needed. As mentioned earlier, Gary had been collecting guns since he was young, and his house was filled with pistols, hunting rifles, shotguns, and more. He even had some rare items placed in different rooms. Recently, Gary decided to install a safe to store all his firearms securely. This sudden decision made Gerald a bit anxious, so he asked Gary why he wanted to hide his gun collection. Gary didn't provide a clear answer, but Gerald sensed that his son was afraid of something, and it didn't seem to be concerns about burglars. Later, when Tasha got home, she revealed that it was her idea to get the safe because she was scared and felt they might be in danger. Although her comments seemed odd at the time, Gerald didn't think much of it. On Sunday, December 10, 2017, Tasha called Gerald, She said she couldn't reach Gary all day. When she got home, the garage door was open. Fearing a burglary, she was too scared to enter the house and asked Gerald to come over. At this time, Connor was safe with his grandparents, leaving Gary home alone. Gerald quickly rushed to the house. At first, everything seemed normal. The garage door was slightly open. Inside, nothing looked out of place, nothing was missing, and there were no signs of an intruder. Gerald called for his son multiple times, but received no answer. When he entered the bedroom, he discovered Gary's lifeless body on the bed. Shocked, Gerald attempted CPR but quickly realized Gary's body was cold and showed signs of rigor mortis. He immediately called 911, still in disbelief that his son was gone. Later, he noticed that the gun safe in the bedroom had been tampered with, and some firearms were missing. When the forensic team arrived, they found that Gary had been killed by a single close-range gunshot to the head. He was lying on his side in bed as if he were asleep, showing no other injuries or signs of a struggle. This suggests he was likely asleep when the killer approached. The crime did not resemble a typical robbery. Valuables, including a jewelry box and cash left out in the open, were untouched. This indicated that the gun safe was the main target. However, only a few guns were stolen, and none were particularly valuable. Neither the stolen guns nor those left behind were the weapon used for the murder. From the beginning of the investigation, Tasha, Gary's wife, was the main suspect. Firstly, she did not act like someone who was grieving. She spoke calmly with the detectives and detailed the events of the day when she and her father-in-law discovered Gary's body. Secondly, friends and family indicated that Gary and Tasha's relationship had been struggling for some time, that a divorce seemed imminent. Thirdly, the Bentleys had two large dogs that typically barked at anyone except their owners. However, neighbors reported they did not hear any barking, and Gary would likely have woken up if he had. Tasha stated that Gary had planned to go hunting that day and that she had left the house to run errands. She mentioned trying to call him after lunch but couldn't get through, attributing it to poor reception. On her way back, she stopped at a friend's house, a detail confirmed by her friends during questioning. There were no witnesses to the crime, no one heard anything unusual or saw any unfamiliar faces that day. Even the surveillance footage from nearby cameras provided no valuable information. It seems that the crime was a meticulously planned event, which was poorly disguised as a robbery. One day, Tasha received a call from Amy Day, who wanted to express condolences and offer help with the funeral arrangements. Tasha's reply shocked Amy. She stated that Gary's parents were in charge of the funeral because she had more crucial matters to attend to. Those crucial matters turned out to be a visit to the insurance company to claim a large payout. Shortly before the murder, Tasha persuaded Gary to take out a $1 million life insurance policy. Although Gary was reluctant, he agreed to please his wife. A few days prior to the crime, Tasha attempted to raise the payout to $2 million but was unsuccessful. This created a clear motive, but there was still no solid evidence connecting Tasha to the murder. Additionally, it was revealed that Tasha had 3 previous cars that mysteriously burned out, each resulting in significant insurance payouts. This suggested that she might have engaged in similar insurance scams in the past. One of Tasha's friends mentioned that she had been in a relationship with a coworker named Anthony for over a year, and he had assisted her in finding a new job. Investigators decided to interrogate Anthony, suspecting he might have played a role in the crime. Anthony acknowledged that he had been in a romantic relationship with Tasha for a long time and shared that they frequently met at his home. He mentioned that Tasha intended to leave Gary and that they had plans to celebrate New Year's Eve 2018 together. As soon as Anthony found out that he was being viewed as a suspect in the murder investigation, he quickly tried to establish an alibi. He said that on the day of the murder, he was at his parents' house assisting them with renovations. They made multiple trips to thrift stores that day, and these trips were recorded on surveillance cameras. Detectives determined that Tasha probably acted alone, which accounted for the absence of forced entry and the dogs not barking. However, the murder weapon and the stolen guns from the safe were still unexplained. Tasha's account of the events was inconsistent, as she continually altered it by adding new information, occasionally attempting to shift blame onto others. She mentioned the disagreement between Gary and Kevin during their vacation. Tasha suggested that Kevin might have held a grudge and seized this chance for revenge. The trial for Gary's murder began in July 2021. The prosecution argued that Tasha's main motive for the crime was financial gain. She aimed to collect $1 million insurance payout and planned to use part of that money to renovate Anthony's house, where she hoped to move soon. After a few hours of questioning, Tasha finally admitted to killing her husband but placed the blame on Gary. She alleged that Gary was abusive to both her and their son, claimed that the day of the murder, he had hit their child again. Tasha said this was the breaking point for her. When Gary fell asleep, she took a gun. However, her accusations were not supported by anyone. Her friends and family all defended Gary, describing him as a loving husband and caring father. They insisted he would never harm Tasha or their young son, whom he cherished. Even their child confirmed that his father had never hurt him or his mother. Tasha eventually disclosed the location where she had hidden the guns she took from the safe, including the murder weapon, a pistol. Notably, the pistol had Anthony's fingerprints on it. Tasha had given the gun to her lover to keep, which resulted in his fingerprints being left on it. Her intention was to frame him if things did not go as planned, but she confessed before she could execute that part of her scheme. On July 20, 2021, Tasha Bentley was found guilty of premeditated murder and attempting to obstruct the investigation. She was sentenced to 55 years in prison, with the possibility of parole not before 2037. She is serving her sentence at the Kentucky Correctional Institution for Women. Little Connor lost both his parents in a tragic incident and is now being raised by his paternal grandparents. This case was highlighted in an episode of Investigation Discovery called American Monster. In the heart of Sydney's central business district, where towering skyscrapers define the skyline and the city pulses with activity, a devastating crime unfolded on August 13, 2019, claiming the life of Michaela Dunn. 3 years earlier, on May 14, 2016, in the vibrant suburb of Parramatta, a brutal assault left Dasha Volnukin deeply traumatized, with her death in May 2018 adding to the sorrow. These incidents, occurring in modern urban settings, shocked their communities and sparked widespread concern about safety in Australia's cities, particularly for those in vulnerable professions like escorting. The stories of Michaela and Dasha, though distinct, highlight the hidden dangers faced by escort profession and the urgent need for systemic protections. Michaela Dunn, a 24-year-old Sydney resident, was tragically murdered in 2019, leaving her family, friends, and community grappling with profound loss. Her death underscored the risks that can persist even in environments designed for security, challenging assumptions about urban safety. Similarly, Dasha Volnukin, a 22-year-old Ukrainian model who had moved to Australia in 2015, endured a horrific assault that marked her life with lasting trauma. Her resilience in reporting the crime led to justice, but her untimely death 2 years later deepened the tragedy. On August 13, 2019, at approximately 1:30 p.m., police received an urgent call about a violent incident in a high-rise apartment on Clarence Street, a bustling thoroughfare in Sydney's CBD lined with corporate offices and residential complexes. Emergency services arrived promptly, discovering a distressing scene inside a modern apartment building. Forensic investigators cordoned off the area, documenting evidence of a struggle, such as disarrayed furniture and personal items. Neighbors reported hearing disturbances, but the building's soundproofed walls obscured critical details, complicating initial inquiries. The investigation revealed that Michaela had been fatally wounded, her body bearing a severe neck injury that marked the brutality of the attack. 3 years earlier, on May 14, 2016, at 1:30 a.m., a similar tragedy struck in Parramatta, a dynamic suburb 25 kilometers west of Sydney's CBD, known for its rich cultural diversity and thriving commercial scene. Dasha Volnukin faced a terrifying assault in a residential unit. The incident unfolded discreetly, leaving few immediate clues. Security footage captured a man, later identified as Mustafa Kairisai, 28, entering and exiting the building, but provided no direct evidence of the violence that transpired inside. Dasha's prompt reporting to police, including detailed descriptions of her assailant, was crucial in advancing the investigation, despite the private nature of the crime. Michaela and Dasha, both young women in their early 20s, lived in Sydney, residing in apartments equipped with modern security features. The fact that these violent acts occurred in private, supposedly safe spaces stunned local residents and prompted extensive police investigations. Authorities worked diligently to establish timelines, interview potential witnesses, and determine whether the cases were connected. While no direct link was confirmed, both women worked as escorts, a legal but high-risk profession in Australia, which emerged as a significant commonality. This shared profession highlighted the vulnerabilities inherent in escort profession, where financial independence comes at the cost of exposure to potential danger. To fully appreciate the impact of these events, it's essential to understand Michaela and Dasha as individuals with unique aspirations and challenges. Their lives, though cut short by tragedy, reflect the complexities of navigating personal and professional choices in a fast-paced, high-cost city like Sydney. Michaela Dunn was a proud Sydney native, raised in inner West Sydney, a region celebrated for its close-knit communities and eclectic atmosphere. By 2019, she had entered the escort industry, a decision that offered financial independence in Sydney's competitive economy. Escorting, while legal in New South Wales, can provide significant earnings, enabling flexibility and opportunities like travel. Michaela's choice to keep her work private was likely influenced by societal stigma, which is a common practice among escorts to protect their personal relationships. Friends remembered her as a compassionate and resilient individual, whose warmth left a lasting impression on those around her. Her engagement with Sydney's vibrant cultural scenes, from art galleries to nightlife, reflected a young woman embracing the city's dynamic spirit. Dasha Volnukin, born in Canada, arrived in Australia in 2015, drawn to Sydney's cosmopolitan allure and economic prospects. At 22, she worked as a model and escort, roles that showcased her confidence and adaptability. Her move to Australia was driven by a desire for new opportunities, but the challenges of building a life in a new country were significant. Dasha's decision to enter the escort industry was kept discreet, likely to avoid judgment in a society that often stigmatizes escort. Friends described her as empathetic and determined, qualities that helped her navigate the complexities of migration and work. Her brief tenure as an escort exposed her to rapid risks, culminating in the traumatic assault that would shape her final years. Both Michaela and Dasha pursued escorting to achieve financial stability and shape their futures in Sydney's demanding environment. The promise of autonomy in a city with high living costs was compelling, yet their profession brought them into contact with dangerous individuals. These incidents underscore the vulnerabilities inherent in escort, despite its legality, and highlight the need for enhanced protections to ensure worker safety. The events leading to these tragedies began with Michaela's murder on August 13, 2019. That day, Sydney's CBD was alive with midday activity, its streets filled with office workers and visitors. In her Clarence Street apartment, designed with modern security measures for young professionals, Michaela prepared to meet a client for a routine appointment. The client, Mert Ney, entered the building mid-afternoon, passing through standard entry protocols. What began as a typical booking turned deadly when Ney attacked Michaela, inflicting a fatal neck wound. He fled via the fire stairs, bloodied, leaving behind evidence of the crime. Police found Michaela deceased in her apartment, a space intended as a sanctuary, revealing a shocking breach of safety. On May 14, 2016, Dasha faced her own harrowing ordeal in a Parramatta residential unit. Arranging a client visit, she met Mustafa Kairisai, who appeared unremarkable upon entry. Inside the apartment, Kairisai turned violent, threatening Dasha with a knife, blindfolding her, and binding her with duct tape. He abused her and forced her to shower, attempting to erase evidence. Dasha survived by complying, but the trauma was profound. After Kairisai fled, she reported the incident to police, providing critical details that aided the investigation. The building's modern design and privacy features limited witness accounts, posing challenges for authorities, but Dasha's courage in reporting the crime was pivotal. Both Michaela and Dasha encountered clients who transformed private meetings into violent ordeals, exposing the inherent dangers of their profession. These incidents, occurring in secure urban settings, challenged assumptions about safety in modern cities and sparked public discourse about the risks faced by sex workers. The investigation into Michaela's death began swiftly on August 13, 2019, at her Clarence Street apartment. Police discovered her body with a fatal neck injury, and forensic teams meticulously collected evidence, including traces of the struggle. Security footage revealed Mert Ney, aged 21, entering the building at 1:30 p.m. and fleeing bloodied at 1:50 p.m., brandishing a knife. Ney's erratic behavior on Clarence Street alarmed pedestrians, leading bystanders to pursue him with improvised tools, a chair and a milk crate, restraining him near Wynyard Lane until police arrested him at 2 p.m. A USB drive containing violent material was recovered, but no terrorist motives were confirmed. Ney, unemployed and residing in Blacktown, had documented mental health struggles, which police noted as a potential factor, though his intent remained unclear. A search of his Blacktown residence provided further context, suggesting financial distress may have contributed to his actions. Dasha's assault investigation progressed due to her immediate report on May 14, 2016. She described her assailant's appearance and actions, which, combined with CCTV footage from the Parramatta unit, helped police identify Kairisai. The footage showed Kairisai entering and exiting calmly, offering no hint of the violence inside. Police canvassed Parramatta, but the building's security measures limited witness accounts. Dasha's description aligned with other assault reports, leading to Kairisai's arrest on May 28, 2016, in Bondi after a pursuit. He was linked to multiple attacks on escorts in 2016, indicating a pattern of predatory behavior. Mert Ney, responsible for Michaela's murder, had a troubled background marked by unemployment and mental health issues. Living in crisis housing in Blacktown in 2019, he faced significant personal challenges, including financial instability and untreated mental health conditions. His arrest initiated legal proceedings for murder, attempted murder of another individual, Lynn Bowe, aged 41, and related offenses. No clear motive was established, with his actions attributed to a combination of mental instability and situational factors. Mustafa Kairisai, born around 1985, targeted escorts in Sydney during 2016. Court records indicate his attacks were planned, exploiting the vulnerabilities of escort. On May 14, he abused Dasha, using a knife to intimidate her and employing tactics like blindfolding and binding to control the situation. Similar incidents in the CBD and Parramatta suggested a deliberate pattern. Kairisai's defense claimed his actions were influenced by personal issues, but evidence of premeditation prevailed. He faced multiple charges, reflecting the severity of his crimes. The cases of Mert Ney and Mustafa Kairisai illustrate divergent pathways to violence, each underscoring unique challenges in addressing crime in urban Australia. Ney's attack on Michaela was a chaotic, impulsive act, seemingly driven by personal distress and mental health struggles, reflecting a life marked by instability. In contrast, Kairisai's assault on Dasha was systematic and predatory, exploiting the vulnerabilities of sex workers in a calculated manner. Their arrests marked the beginning of legal efforts to hold them accountable for the harm inflicted on Michaela, Dasha, and others. The legal proceedings for Dasha's case unfolded at Sydney's Downing Centre District Court, focusing on the May 14, 2016, assault and related crimes. Prosecutors presented Dasha's testimony, which detailed the harrowing ordeal, alongside CCTV footage from the Parramatta unit that corroborated her account. The evidence highlighted Kairisai's methodical tactics, including his use of a knife and attempts to erase evidence. The defense argued that Kairisai's actions were influenced by personal circumstances, but the prosecution emphasized his intent to harm. Dasha passed away in May 2018, 2 years after the assault. Her loss deepened the sorrow felt by her friends and community, who remembered her as a vibrant, resilient individual. Tributes highlighted her determination and warmth, qualities that shone through despite the trauma she endured. Her work as a model and her efforts to build a life in Australia reflected a young woman full of promise, making her death all the more poignant. Mert Ney's trial, following his August 2019 arrest, was a significant undertaking at the Downing Centre District Court. Prosecutors argued that Ney's actions were premeditated, pointing to his possession of a knife and his behavior after the crime, which included fleeing bloodied and brandishing the weapon in public. Justice Peter Johnson, presiding over the case, described the attack as exceptionally brutal, noting its devastating impact on Michaela's family and community. Ney's defense team highlighted his mental health struggles, including untreated conditions that may have contributed to his actions. However, evidence of his awareness during the crime undermined these arguments. On May 14, 2021, Ney was sentenced to 44 years in prison with a 33-year non-parole period, reflecting the severity of the offense. In October 2023, an appeal reduced his sentence to 40 years with a 30-year non-parole period, acknowledging procedural considerations while maintaining significant accountability. In 2022, Ney pleaded guilty to assaulting a guard at Goulburn Correctional Center, receiving a concurrent sentence that did not extend his overall term, raising questions about managing ongoing risks posed by incarcerated individuals. Sydney's CBD, a vibrant hub of commerce and culture, and Parramatta, a multicultural suburb undergoing rapid urban renewal, served as the backdrops for these tragedies. Michaela's apartment on Clarence Street, located near iconic landmarks like the Sydney Harbour Bridge and the Parramatta unit where Dasha was assaulted, represented modern urban living with advanced security features. Yet, these settings fail to protect Michaela and Dasha, exposing a stark paradox: private spaces, designed for safety, can become sites of extreme violence. This contradiction fueled public discourse about urban safety and the vulnerabilities inherent in certain professions, particularly escort. The escort industry in Australia, legally recognized in New South Wales since 1995, operates within a complex and often challenging landscape. Escorts, whether working independently or through agencies, can earn substantial incomes, particularly in high-cost cities like Sydney, where living expenses drive many to seek lucrative opportunities. Michaela and Dasha's decisions to enter this field likely stemmed from the need for financial independence in a competitive economy. Escorting offers flexibility and the potential for significant earnings, with hourly rates in Sydney often ranging from $300 to $1,000, depending on services and clientele. However, the industry's risks, violence, stigma, and inadequate safety measures place workers in precarious positions. Unlike other professions, escorting lacks standardized protections, such as mandatory client screening, accessible emergency support systems, or comprehensive training on risk management. These gaps were evident in Michaela and Dasha's cases, where private meetings with clients turned deadly or traumatic, highlighting the urgent need for reform. Police investigations into both cases relied on established methods for urban crime, including security footage, witness statements, and victim reports. The rapid arrest of Mert Ney on August 13, 2019, demonstrated the power of community intervention. Bystanders, witnessing Ney's erratic behavior on Clarence Street, courageously restrained him using a chair and a milk crate, preventing further harm until police arrived. Their actions became a symbol of community resilience, widely covered by Australian media, and sparked discussions about the role of civilians in public safety. Dasha's prompt and detailed report on May 14, 2016, was equally critical, enabling police to identify Mustafa Kairisai through CCTV and her descriptions. However, the scarcity of witnesses in modern residential buildings, designed with privacy in mind, posed significant challenges. In Parramatta, the unit's security measures limited external accounts, complicating efforts to corroborate Dasha's testimony and underscoring a broader issue in investigating private space crimes. Serial offender Mustafa Kairisai was sentenced to 34 years in prison in August 2021 for 30 counts of abuse, abuse assault, and child abuse, having abuse assaulted a schoolgirl over 5 hours at 10 locations in 2016. He received an additional 38-year sentence for the abuse and robbery of 7 other women in the same year, including Dasha Volnukin. In 2021, Kairisai was given just 12 months to live after being diagnosed with an undisclosed terminal illness and undergoing chemotherapy in prison. Had he survived, he would not have been eligible for release until 2066. Correctional Services NSW confirmed that 31-year-old Kairisai died in the high-security prison block at Prince of Wales Hospital in January 2022. Australia's legal system, grounded in common law principles, delivered verdicts in both cases, but the outcomes revealed systemic challenges. Nay's 40-year sentence, adjusted on appeal in October 2023, and Kairisai's 72-year sentence in 2021 provided a measure of accountability, yet the prolonged trials and complex defenses, particularly Nay's mental health arguments, delayed resolution for the victims' families. The economic realities of Sydney, one of the world's most expensive cities, played a significant role in Michaela and Dasha's choices. With median rent for a one-bedroom apartment in the CBD exceeding $700 per week in 2019, and living costs rising steadily, many young people turn to high-paying industries like escorting to afford a comfortable lifestyle. This economic pressure, combined with the flexibility of escort profession, makes it an attractive option, yet the lack of regulatory oversight leaves workers exposed to exploitation and violence. Comparative data from other decriminalized jurisdictions, such as New Zealand, suggests that mandatory client registries and worker support networks can reduce violence, offering a model for Australia to consider. Implementing such measures could address the systemic vulnerabilities exposed by these cases, ensuring that financial necessity does not come at the cost of safety. The role of technology in these investigations also warrants examination. CCTV footage was pivotal in both cases, providing visual evidence that linked Nay and Kairisai to the crime scenes. However, the limitations of surveillance in private spaces, where cameras are restricted to common areas like lobbies, highlight a gap in evidence collection. Balancing technological innovation with civil liberties is a critical challenge for Australian law enforcement, particularly in high-density urban areas where crimes often occur behind closed doors. The legacy of Michaela Dunn and Dasha Volnukin serves as a powerful call to action. Their stories, though marked by loss, highlight the resilience of individuals and communities in the face of adversity. Michaela's vibrant engagement with Sydney's cultural life and Dasha's determination to build a new life in Australia reflect young women full of potential, whose lives were cut short by preventable violence. By addressing the systemic issues exposed by their cases, urban safety gaps, escort vulnerabilities, mental health deficiencies, and sentencing disparities, Australia can honor their memory through meaningful change. Enhanced protections, better support systems, and a commitment to equity can ensure that no one else faces such preventable harm, creating safer, more inclusive communities for all.
Luisa Fernanda Garces Perez was born in Villa Maria. Luisa had a younger brother who was 2 years her junior. The siblings were very close, communicated well, and supported each other from a young age. Their father, Giovanni Garces, frequently worked long hours in warehouses, often taking night shifts to provide for the family. He often came home early in the morning, slept until the evening, and then returned to work. Despite the exhausting nature of his job, Giovanni always made time for his family. Luisa's mother primarily focused on managing the household and caring for her children instead of working outside the home. The grandparents, particularly on the father's side, played a significant role in their lives. Since they lived nearby, the children frequently visited and often stayed overnight. People who knew Luisa well described her as kind, intelligent, and lively. She was dedicated and responsible in her studies, earning good grades in all her subjects. Luisa was convinced that her academic success would lead to a brighter future and a more comfortable life than her parents had. Luisa was very sociable and had formed strong friendships with her classmates. They spent a lot of time together, studying and enjoying their free time. The group had always been close. However, in January 2014, things started to change. Many people noticed that Luisa began to distance herself from her friends. She went from being active and friendly to feeling irritated, even aggressive. It seemed like she was constantly looking for reasons to argue. Some thought this behavior was just a typical part of her teenage years. However, her conflicts with classmates increased, and she started to challenge her teacher's authority, creating many problems in her class. This was a sharp contrast to her previous compliant behavior. In July 2014, The school administration reached out to Luisa's family to recommend her removal from the school because of her disruptive behavior and the negative impact she was having on her classmates. Luisa, who had previously been a dedicated student, started to struggle in most subjects and underwent significant changes in her behavior. Her family attempted to communicate with her to understand what was happening, but Luisa remained distant and emotionally unavailable, unwilling to talk or share the reasons for her sudden transformation. Luisa's father was very worried. He tried several times to talk to her openly to figure out what was going on. He couldn't help but remember his kind and cheerful daughter, who now seemed so serious and rarely smiled. Even his father, who was once very close to her, couldn't reach her. She stubbornly refused to open up. Ultimately, Giovanni had to accept that this behavior was simply a part of her adolescence and hormonal changes. By August 2014, her parents had been divorced for 8 months. The primary issue in their marriage was her mother's struggle with alcohol. Her father also suspected that her mother was unfaithful and was often drunk, acted irresponsibly towards their children. As a result, after the divorce, Giovanni took responsibility for their daughter Luisa and her younger brother, raising them as a single father while their mother moved to another city to start a new life. Giovanni was concerned when the situation did not improve, so he thought a change of scenery might help. He contacted his sister, Maria, who lived in a nearby city. Maria agreed to take Luisa in for a while. At first, she frequently called Giovanni to report that Luisa was doing well and her behavior had improved a bit. However, once Luisa settled into the new environment, she became more withdrawn and aggressive again. Suspecting something was wrong, Maria reached out to social services for help. A psychologist assessed Luisa and later informed Maria of distressing news. He believed the girl's mental state suggested she might have been abused. Maria was taken aback and immediately called Giovanni to share this information. Giovanni was shocked by the news from the social worker. Although he did not want to believe that his daughter could be a victim of abuse, he recognized that her behavior aligned with signs of such trauma. Luisa's mother remained calm and reserved, but Giovanni was deeply worried about his daughter. He wanted to understand how this could happen and who might be involved. Now, he felt compelled to investigate whether the social worker's claim was true. Initially, he spoke with his sister and concluded that he needed to have a direct conversation with his daughter. After a short time, on August 19, 2014, Luisa came back to her father. They faced a tough discussion. Giovanni chose to be straightforward and immediately asked if she had been abused. Luisa could not speak and started to cry, which made her father realize the truth. All of the hurt, anger, and frustration that Luisa had been carrying came pouring out. She didn't share every detail, but according to Luisa, at the end of January 2014, when her father left for his night shift again, a friend of her mother came to visit. The two women began to drink together. Soon after, a man whom Luisa had never met arrived. He brought more alcohol and acted as if he were familiar with everyone. They welcomed him joyfully. Soon, they were all drinking together. When the alcohol was gone, two women fell asleep on the sofas, having consumed too much, while the stranger remained upright, noticeably less intoxicated than the others. He turned to Luisa and her brother, suggested they go to a nearby tent to eat hot dogs. They were easily convinced and happily followed the man to the closest eatery. They trusted him because they had seen their mother speak to him calmly and openly. After enjoying their hot dogs, they returned home. Two women were still asleep on the sofas. Since it was late in the evening, the children were also ready for bed. As soon as they got back inside, they went straight to their bedroom. Almost immediately, the man walked into the room. He offered Luisa's brother 50,000 Colombian pesos, which was a day's wages at that time, and a tempting offer for the young boy, told him to go to bed with his mother. Not realizing the man's true intentions, Luisa's brother took the money and followed his instructions to leave the room. The man then warned him not to come back for any reason. Luckily, Luisa's brother found it difficult to sleep. A few minutes later, Luisa's brother heard his sister crying softly from the children's bedroom. When he went back into the room, he was shocked to find the man in bed with Louisa. Confused and unsure of what to do, the boy hesitated. Louisa quickly panicked and chased him away. In an odd turn of events, their mother slept so deeply that she didn't wake up to check on the children. Despite the noise, Louisa asked her brother not to share what had happened because she was worried about the consequences. They both kept this painful secret for several months. Louisa's brother was still young and didn't fully grasp the situation. Louisa chose not to discuss any details because she was consumed by her own pain and anger. After this incident, Giovanni finally understood his daughter's behavior. He realized why she had become so withdrawn and aggressive during that time. Naturally, he was furious with his ex-wife for letting a stranger be in the house with their children while he was at work. Giovanni felt she had contributed to the attack on their daughter. He was terrified to think about what could have happened if his son hadn't woken up and scared away the attacker. The children had been at risk that whole evening. However, Giovanni quickly called his ex-wife to tell her what had happened and to blame her for it. She defended herself, saying she had no idea anything like this would happen. She stated that she didn't even know the man's name since he wasn't a close friend. The group had only met a few times. Giovanni realized that his ex-wife was merely covering for the criminal, which was an even greater blow to him. After recovering from the shock, Giovanni was determined to confront the situation. He took Louisa for a medical checkup to ensure her health and officially document the attack so they could report it to the police. He filed a report with the police and then returned home. Now, they awaited updates from law enforcement, hoping to see the perpetrator brought to justice soon. The next day, August 20th, 2014, Giovanni started his usual night shift at the warehouse. After these shifts, he was always exhausted and went straight to bed. That morning was no different. He saw his daughter doing her homework, and they exchanged a few words before he told her he was going to sleep since he needed to rest. This meant he would wake up around 7 or 8 p.m. During this time, Louisa was on her own, but her grandparents often visited her. She usually found activities to keep herself occupied and stayed at home. When Giovanni woke up, he noticed that Louisa was not there. He wasn't overly worried at first, thinking she might be at his parents' house nearby. Giovanni headed to work for his night shift and decided to call his father to check on Louisa. However, his father informed him that he had not seen her. She had visited them in the morning, but had returned home afterward. This news made Giovanni anxious. To avoid panicking, he reached out to friends and family who might know her whereabouts, but no one had seen her. Additionally, Louisa's brother spent the entire day with their grandfather, which increased their concern. Giovanni took a leave of absence from work and, along with his parents, started searching for his daughter. They were very concerned, believing that Louisa was still in danger. On August 21st, 2014, after a long night of searching without success, they returned to the police station to report their child's disappearance. As soon as they filed the report, a public announcement was made and many flyers were printed. Pictures of Louisa, along with her description and details about her disappearance, were distributed around the city to seek information. On the same day, witnesses reported seeing Louisa in various cities. Some said she was wandering the streets, while others claimed she was with a group of men. This news was concerning, but also offered a glimmer of hope. Sadly, subsequent searches turned up nothing. Giovanni's anxiety grew with each passing moment. He struggled to eat or sleep, consumed by worry for his daughter's safety. Law enforcement did not stay idle. As soon as they received the report, they started searching for Louisa right away. The detectives treated the situation with great seriousness, particularly because of the abuse allegation. It felt too coincidental. The day before the attack, the girl had gone to the hospital, where the abuse was confirmed. This led to concerns that the attacker might have tried to silence her to prevent her from testifying in court. But how could he have learned about her so quickly? Unfortunately, no one knew the identity or address of the man. There was very little information about the abuser. However, a few individuals could provide more insights. The police reached out to Louisa's mother's friend. She told the detectives that in early January, she and Luisa's mother had enjoyed some beers together after work. During their time together, she received a call from an unknown number. When she answered, she felt at ease upon recognizing the voice of a young hairdresser she had met about 7 years earlier. Based on their conversation, he expressed a desire to meet and talk with them, offering to bring alcohol with him. She readily accepted his suggestion. Luisa's mother's deception was uncovered when it was revealed that she had known the man for a long time. At that moment, the police came up to her. Luisa's mother admitted that the man was her ex-friend, who had been released from prison in early January 2014. She had visited him multiple times while he was in prison. When Luisa's father found out all the details, he was enraged and couldn't understand how she had let such a dangerous man approach her children. However, his main concern at that moment was finding out where Luisa was. Luisa's mother, who was still protecting the suspected, was brief and told the detectives that she didn't know his full name. Everyone who knew him referred to him as Peluco. When investigators sought more information from her, she became hostile and firmly refused to share any details about her personal life or history. Despite the fact that such information could assist in locating her daughter, it appeared that she was indifferent to the well-being of her 13-year-old girl. Unfortunately for police, neither woman was able to provide enough information to help find the man. Giovanni and his father were greatly affected by this setback, as they had been searching for a long time. To gather information, Luisa's grandfather disguised himself as a homeless man and wandered through the city's dangerous areas. Unfortunately, he did not manage to uncover any useful information. On August 26, 2014, a fisherman visited the police station to report a finding. That morning, he had discovered a body along the banks of the Corca River. When the investigators arrived at the scene, they found a dismembered body with parts scattered around, suggesting that wild animals had disturbed the remains. Initially, many of the body parts were missing, but they did find some legs that were tied together with shoelaces. All of these remains were inside a bag. Additionally, a strand of hair was found within the bag, and this limited evidence was carefully collected for identification. Reports of disappearances in the area were checked against recent appeals. The concerns raised by Giovanni about the missing girls were the most closely related. Clothes found on the body matched those of Luisa. DNA samples were taken from Luisa's father to compare with the remains. After 2 months, in October, the results came in. The human remains found by the riverbank were identified as belonging to Luisa. By this time, additional body parts had also been found. A thorough forensic examination revealed that Luisa died from a severe blow to the right side of her head. Her family was heartbroken upon hearing this news. The elderly grandfather expressed that this was the most tragic event he had ever faced in his long life. The investigation's findings were disheartening. Luisa's body showed no evidence of foreign DNA or biological fluids because of the effects of water, leaving uncertainty about whether she had been abused before her death. No fingerprints or other evidence suitable for examination were found on the bag, and the hair discovered on it belonged to Luisa. There were no signs pointing to a suspect. Additionally, investigators have not yet been able to determine the full name of the man who abused Luisa and is likely connected to her death. Luisa's grandfather took action in response to his granddaughter's death. He put up a black and white flag on the front of his house. He explained that the white color symbolizes his granddaughter's purity, while the black represents mourning. He vowed to keep the flag up until the people responsible for her death are apprehended. He continued his efforts even more. At the top of the house, he installed a cross with purple edges to symbolize his sorrow. The sides of the cross were decorated with green garlands, and the center featured red garlands. The green represented his hope that the police would catch the criminals, while the red symbolized the blood shed by his granddaughter. Detectives resumed interviewing the victim's family acquaintances individually. It was during this process that one of Luisa's friends provided crucial information. The schoolboy reported seeing Luisa on the day she went missing. The boy was aware that Giovanni had returned home from his night shift and was resting. At one point, Luisa expressed a desire to find her uncle, and he offered to assist her. They went out together to search for her uncle and made a stop at a hot dog stand. Luisa noted that it was the same place where she and her brother had been abducted by the abuser in January. After hearing the boy's statement, the police visited a hot dog stand and spoke with a seller. He was hesitant to cooperate, but recalled Luisa's visit from a few months ago. This witness described one of the men who visited the stand with 2 children late one evening in January. Interestingly, he remembered this incident because he had sold a motorcycle to that man and still had his phone number. He then shared this number with Luisa, who called it to arrange a meeting. According to the boy, all this happened about 20-30 minutes later. Therefore, he was happy for Luisa that she had found her uncle, and he went home. After that, Luisa was left alone, next to the tent, waiting for her uncle. After a while, the uncle drove up on a motorcycle. Luisa ran up to him and talked to him about something. After that, she got on the motorcycle, and both of them left in an unknown direction. According to the seller, a few days later, he saw a picture of Luisa in a report about her disappearance, but only now connected all these events. Investigators were amazed that so many people knew who they were talking about, but no one could even provide a name for the suspect. After the story of the classmate and the hot dog seller, there were even more questions. Why was Luisa searching for this man so much? Why did she call him uncle and communicate with him? Why did she leave with a dangerous man? It all sounded absurd. In any case, it was necessary to get the name of this person. The police returned to analyzing the information they had. Since Luisa's mother claimed to have visited this person in prison, it became possible to trace these visits. They decided to check this lead, but it took even longer to check the archives. In December 2014, detectives made an important discovery. Luisa's mother had visited Gabriel Jaime Marulanda Sepulveda, who was 43 years old at the time. Investigating Gabriel's background shed light on why witnesses claimed they didn't recognize him. Since 1995, he had a lengthy criminal history, including various offenses, the most severe being the murder of a student at Universidad Nacional de Bogotá. His record included robberies, assaults, domestic violence, illegal possession of weapons, and escaping from prison, along with several incidents where he was not convicted. Overall, he had been arrested 13 times and faced trial 8 times. He was released for the murder charge at the end of 2013. During this period, he had multiple relationships and 3 children. This information contradicted witness statements, leading to suspicions that they may have been intimidated or that Gabriel had misrepresented himself. When the photo of the suspect was shown to Luisa's brother, he instantly recognized him. The investigators also verified the suspect's connection to Gabriel by checking the phone number obtained from a hot dog seller. However, there was no direct evidence linking him to Luisa's murder. To investigate further, the authorities reviewed his phone records and tracked his geolocation, discovering that his mobile phone was located precisely at the site where Luisa's body was found. On August 21st, around 5:30 p.m., the day after her disappearance, he tried to dispose of the body at that location. Eventually, the police issued a warrant for Gabriel's arrest, but finding him proved to be more challenging than expected. There was very little information available about him. He couldn't be found at his known addresses, but it was known that he had been working as a helper in a coffee shop in the countryside. However, even there, the employers did not offer any useful information. Additionally, the phone number provided by the hot dog seller was no longer in service. Gabriel didn't have to wait long for his next legal trouble. In May 2015, he was arrested while attending a hearing for one of his previous offenses. 2 new charges were added: the abuse and murder of Luisa Fernanda Garces Perez. He could face a prison sentence ranging from 33 to 50 years. Unsurprisingly, Gabriel denied any responsibility for Luisa's death, which led to delays in the trial. The prosecution aimed to collect as much indirect evidence as possible, and a lawyer's involvement further contributed to the postponement. Overall, the hearing was delayed for 2 years, during which the defense tried to paint Gabriel as a victim of police misconduct. There was no concrete evidence linking him to the murder, so the lawyers argued that he was a scapegoat targeted by the police due to a lack of other suspects. Gabriel showed no remorse for his actions. Instead of confessing, he claimed he wasn't in town when Luisa went missing. He also described Luisa's mother as an escort whose services he frequently used, stating this was the reason for his visit to her house in January 2014 while denying any wrongdoing. A crucial witness for the prosecution was a hot dog vendor who had observed Gabriel leaving with Luisa on a motorcycle. Unfortunately, the hot dog vendor did not show up in court. His mother claimed he had found a new job and moved away, but many suspected this was a result of pressure and threats from Gabriel. He was unwilling to testify against Gabriel. The police later learned that he had previously been incarcerated and was a former cellmate of Gabriel, which meant he was aware of Gabriel's violent nature and was afraid for his safety. The hearings started with the prosecutor claiming that Gabriel misled and took Luisa to the riverbank. Gabriel was upset with her when he discovered she was with her father. Giovanni alerted the police. He then hit her on the head, tied her legs with shoelaces, and threw her into the water before escaping. Evidence included witness testimonies and mobile phone records. Ultimately, Gabriel Jaime Marulanda Sepulveda was sentenced to between 25 and 41 years in prison for Luisa's murder and 9 years for the abuse, for a total of 34 to 50 years. Despite the fact that Luisa's family achieved justice, many questions remained unanswered. The criminal never confessed why Louise called him uncle, why she met with him willingly, or why she left with him on a motorcycle. The police believed that Luisa wanted to meet with him to inform him that she had reported him to the authorities and that she probably did not fully realize how dangerous the situation was. After these events, Giovanni still believed that not all perpetrators were held accountable for their crimes. He blamed his ex-wife for the misadventures his daughter had gone through, as well as for her death. However, it seemed that the woman was not overly troubled by all of this. Although many condemned the mother for her carelessness, which cost her daughter dearly, she was never held accountable. It was March the 25th, 2022 in Mayfield, a quiet suburb of Newcastle, Australia. 21-year-old Mackenzie Anderson, known as Max to her friends, was at home in her modest apartment on Crebbet Street. She was a young mother, her life revolving around her 23-month-old son. Around 10:40 p.m., a frantic call reached the local police. A neighbor, startled by screams, reported a disturbance at Mackenzie's apartment. The police rushed to the scene. When they arrived at the Mayfield Street apartment, they found a horrific scene. Mackenzie was born and raised in Newcastle, New South Wales, in a close-knit family. Her mother, Tabitha Ackret, a dental hygienist, was a pillar of support. Their bond was evident in the heartfelt tributes Tabitha later shared. Mackenzie was also close to her stepfather and friends, who described her as the heart of their circle. She had a knack for making people laugh, often sharing snippets of her life on social media, where her TikTok videos captured her humor and strength as a young mother. Her son was her world, and she poured her energy into creating a stable life for him despite the hardships she faced. Mackenzie's life hadn't been easy. By her early 20s, she was navigating the challenges of single motherhood while living in a modest unit on Crebbet Street. Friends said she was determined to break free from a cycle of hardship, working to provide for her son and dreaming of a brighter future. Her relationship with Tyrone Thompson, her ex-partner, cast a long shadow over her life. The two began dating in late 2019, and their on-again relationship was marked by turbulence. By October 2021, Thompson had been jailed for assaulting Mackenzie, intimidating her, and damaging her property. An apprehended violence order was in place, meant to keep Thompson away from Mackenzie, prohibiting any contact or visits to her home. He served a short sentence with a non-parole period of just over 4 months and was released on March 9, 2022. Mackenzie's friends later revealed Mackenzie lived in constant fear convinced Thompson would come after her once he was free. Then, she messaged a friend, saying that Tyrone had just gotten out of jail and was still being weird, harassing her. Despite the AVO, Thompson reached out to Mackenzie almost immediately after his release, calling her and sending messages from multiple social media accounts. One heartbreaking detail emerged later. Mackenzie had ordered for a new set of knives for Christmas 2021, a practical gift for her home. Those same knives would later become part of the tragedy. The night of March 25th, 2022, started like any other in the quiet suburb of Mayfield. But beneath the surface of this ordinary night, a tragedy was unfolding. Mackenzie's apartment on Mayfield was a small, unassuming unit in a block of flats, the kind of place where neighbors knew each other by sight, even by name. That evening, she wasn't alone. A male friend, whose identity was closely guarded in early reports, was with her, along with her 23-month-old son, who was likely asleep in his crib. Tyrone Thompson, her ex-partner, was also present at some point during the night, despite the apprehended violence order that barred him from contacting her or visiting her home. The details of how Thompson ended up at her apartment remain murky, but court records later revealed that he had been asked to leave multiple times that evening. His refusal to comply set the stage for what would become a devastating confrontation. In panic, a neighbor dialed emergency services, describing a scene that sounded dire: a woman's voice in distress, a man's voice shouting, and the unmistakable sense that something was terribly wrong. The urgency was clear enough to prompt an immediate response from the Newcastle City Police District. When police arrived at the apartment block, they were met with a harrowing sight. Mackenzie lay lifeless on the veranda outside her unit, her body surrounded by blood. The scene was chaotic, with paramedics soon joining the officers in a frantic attempt to save her. Despite their best efforts, Mackenzie was pronounced dead at the scene. Her injuries were too severe to overcome. Her toddler son, found inside the apartment, was mercifully unharmed. Police found a man at the scene, later identified as Tyrone Thompson, sitting cross-legged at the top of the communal stairs, his hand bloodied and injured. He was loud and demanding medical attention for his wound. A broken knife handle and blade were found near Mackenzie, stark evidence of the brutality that had unfolded. Thompson was arrested and taken to hospital under police guard for treatment of his injury. The tragedy was the culmination of events that had been building for weeks. After his release from prison on March 9, 2022, Thompson immediately breached the apprehended violence order. He began contacting Mackenzie, calling her, messaging her from multiple social media accounts, and even reaching out to people close to her new partner. Court documents later revealed that Mackenzie had spent much of the previous 6 days with Thompson. Despite her fear of him, friends said she felt trapped, unsure how to break free from his persistent attempts to reconnect. That night, Thompson and a male friend were among those gathered at her apartment. Though the exact dynamics remain unclear, tensions escalated. The male friend, who had left earlier in the evening, returned to check on her, only to witness a horrific scene. Thompson standing over Mackenzie, who was already on the ground. Investigators later learned that Mackenzie had been trying to protect herself in the days leading up to that night. She had reached out to domestic violence advocacy groups, emailing them to request help with security measures like cameras and reinforced doors. The night of March 25th wasn't a sudden explosion of violence, but the culmination of a pattern of control and intimidation. Yet, the system allowed him back into her life just 16 days before her death. The AVO, meant to be her shield, was little more than a piece of paper. The Newcastle City Police District launched a meticulous investigation to uncover what had happened in those chaotic final moments. The investigation began at the crime scene itself. Detectives meticulously combed through Mackenzie's apartment, cataloging every detail. The veranda where her body was found was a focal point, marked by bloodstains and the shattered remnants of a knife. Forensic teams collected the fragments, knowing they could hold critical clues about the weapon and its wielder. Inside the apartment, officers found signs of a disturbance, overturned furniture, scattered belongings, and traces of blood that hinted at a confrontation that had moved from inside to the veranda. Digital evidence also became a cornerstone of the investigation. Mackenzie's phone and social media accounts revealed a trail of fear and desperation. Investigators found messages between Mackenzie and Thompson showing they had been in contact since his release. Some exchanges were tense, others oddly amicable, suggesting a complex dynamic. Thompson had also messaged people close to Mackenzie's new partner, attempting to gather information or assert control. These communications, pulled from servers and cross-referenced with phone records, showed he had breached the AVO multiple times. Detectives also explored Mackenzie's broader relationships. They interviewed her mother, Tabitha, who shared her daughter's fears about Thompson. In a statement to the court, later reported by the Newcastle Herald, Tabitha said, "Mackenzie lived in constant fear after Thompson's release." Mackenzie told Tabitha he wouldn't let her go. Friends echoed this, describing how Mackenzie had confided in them about Thompson's persistent attempts to reconnect. One friend told police she wanted to protect her son but felt trapped, like there was no way out. During police questioning, Thompson's statements were guarded but revealing. According to court reports, later cited by the Newcastle Herald, he claimed the incident was a chaotic misunderstanding. He admitted to being at Mackenzie's apartment that night despite the AVO but insisted he had been invited. He described an argument that escalated, alleging that Mackenzie had been the aggressor, wielding a knife in a heated moment. His account painted a picture of self-defense, claiming his hand injury came from trying to disarm her. Though his story shifted under scrutiny, with inconsistencies about the sequence of events, he denied any intent to harm her. However, his explanation struggled to align with the physical evidence. The broken knife, Mackenzie's fatal injuries, and witness accounts of her desperation to escape. Detectives pressed Thompson about his actions in the days leading up to the incident, confronting him with evidence of his repeated AVO breaches, including messages and calls to Mackenzie and her associate. Thompson downplayed these breaches, claiming he was trying to sort things out and maintain a connection for the sake of their shared history. As Thompson remained in custody, the investigation continued to solidify the case. Forensic reports confirmed Mackenzie's blood on the knife and Thompson's DNA on the handle, strengthening the link to the crime. The autopsy of Mackenzie Anderson revealed she suffered 78 stab wounds inflicted in less than 3 minutes. On March 27, 2022, Thompson was formally charged with murder, breaching an AVO, and related offenses stemming from the events of that night. The murder charge was anchored by compelling evidence, knife fragments bearing Mackenzie's blood, witness accounts of her screams, and Thompson's presence at the scene with a suspicious injury. Additional charges included intimidating behavior, reflecting his pattern of harassment in the weeks prior. The motive, while not explicitly stated by Thompson, emerged through the investigation's findings. Detectives and domestic violence experts consulted concluded Thompson's actions stemmed from a need to regain control of Mackenzie, who was trying to move on with her life and protect her son. The presence of Mackenzie's male friend that night may have been a catalyst, intensifying Thompson's fixation. The charges against Thompson were a step toward justice. They also highlighted the failures that allowed him to remain a threat. By early 2025, the case had reached a critical juncture in the Newcastle Supreme Court, where the pursuit of justice for the 21-year-old mother unfolded. Initially set for a 4-week trial starting April 7, 2025, the case took a dramatic turn when Tyrone Thompson, then 25, changed his plea on April 1, 2025, in the New South Wales Supreme Court. He pleaded guilty to the domestic violence murder of Mackenzie Anderson, halting the need for a full trial. This plea came after years of denials, during which he had maintained his innocence even as evidence mounted against him. The guilty plea was a significant moment, sparing Mackenzie's family the pain of a protracted trial, but shifting the focus to the sentencing hearing, where the court would determine the consequences of his actions. The hearing, presided over by Justice Richard Weinstein, became a pivotal moment for all involved. The prosecution, led by Crown Prosecutor Brendan Queenan, presented a harrowing case. They argued that Thompson's actions on March 25, 2022, were a brutal culmination of a pattern of control and violence. Court documents detailed how Thompson, on parole for prior domestic violence offenses against Mackenzie, ignored an apprehended violence order and broke into her Mayfield apartment twice that night. Using 2 kitchen knives, he stabbed her 78 times in less than 3 minutes, an attack so ferocious that one knife snapped. The prosecution emphasized Mackenzie's vulnerability, noting her repeated attempts to seek safety through advocacy groups and her fear that Thompson would harm her after his release. The defense, representing Thompson, acknowledged the gravity of his actions, but sought leniency by highlighting mitigating factors. They argued that Thompson's mental health issues and challenging background diminished his moral culpability. His legal team submitted that he was not psychotic at the time of the crime, but struggled with emotional instability, which contributed to the escalation. Then, an apology letter from Thompson was tendered, in which he expressed regret, stating, "No words can undo the pain and devastation he caused to someone he genuinely loved." However, the prosecution challenged this, with Queenan noting there is some element of victim blaming. Justice Weinstein, wary of the letter's sincerity, remarked that it offered limited insight into true remorse. On May 1, 2025, Justice Weinstein delivered the sentence. Thompson was jailed for a maximum of 22 years 6 months, with a non-parole period of 15 years 6 months, making him eligible for parole in 2038. The judge described the attack as a frenzied act of such ferocity that it left Mackenzie's family shattered. Noting their helplessness, despair, and anger, he acknowledged the aggravating factors, including Thompson's prior violence and Mackenzie's fear, but also considered his guilty plea and personal circumstances when setting the term. The sentence sparked immediate outrage from Mackenzie's family, particularly her mother, Tabitha Ackert. Outside the Newcastle Supreme Court, she collapsed in tears, telling reporters that whilst it might be thought of as a good outcome for the courts, they were disgusted that that sentence was what they thought the value of her daughter's life was worth. She called the sentence an insult to women globally and demanded an appeal. On May 14, 2025, the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions announced it would appeal Thompson's sentence, arguing that it was manifestly inadequate given the severity of the crime. Tabitha welcomed the decision, stating, "This is the first hurdle to getting a sentence that is more in line with community and moral standards." The appeal, set for a 2-hour hearing in the Court of Criminal Appeal on August 8, 2025, aims to increase Thompson's jail time. Prosecutors are citing the need to set a stronger precedent against domestic violence offenders. The case's current status leaves Thompson in prison, awaiting the appeal's outcome. While Mackenzie's family continues their advocacy, the appeal could reshape the sentence, but no verdict can undo the loss. For Mackenzie's son, now in the care of relatives and her loved ones, the fight is as much about honoring her memory as it is about ensuring others don't suffer the same fate. The question lingers: will the legal system deliver a punishment that reflects the true cost of Mackenzie's life, or will it fall short again? It was a quiet evening in Bristol, just after 8 p.m., when things took a dark turn inside a home. The shouting grew louder, followed by a sudden silence. A young child stood at the top of the stairs, watching what no child should ever see. Someone lying on the kitchen floor downstairs, bleeding. The other person was already trying to hide what had happened. This wasn't just a fight. It was the breaking point of a relationship full of jealousy, anger, and years of warning signs. No one expected that night to end in tragedy, but when the truth came out, it shocked everyone. Abigail White was born in 1998 and raised in Bristol, England. The early chapters of her life were defined not by innocence or joy, but by chaos and abuse. From a young age, Abigail found herself in a home dominated by violence. Her father was abusive, routinely harming her mother. Though her parents eventually divorced, any hope for peace was short-lived. Abigail's mother entered a new relationship, and a new man moved into the home. Instead of stability, the cycle of abuse continued, with the new man creating a similarly hostile environment. When Abigail's mother gave birth to a new child, her stepfather's cruelty escalated. He began abusing Abigail. The trauma was finally exposed. Abigail was removed from the home and placed into foster care, but the damage had already taken root. Foster care was supposed to be a turning point, a place to heal, but Abigail carried her scars with her. School became an ongoing struggle. She had trouble focusing, lashed out frequently, and reacted violently to the smallest disruptions. Her anger wasn't just surface level. It came from a deep place, a defense mechanism forged by years of trauma. She demanded control in all situations, often exploding when she didn't get her way. Eventually, her behavior led to expulsion, and she was transferred to a school designed for students with serious behavioral issues. She briefly lived with her grandmother, but even that environment proved too volatile. Her grandmother couldn't handle Abigail's unpredictable moods. The girl was just 13 when she was sent back to her biological father, an alcoholic who was in no position to provide stability or guidance. Though Abigail made efforts to attend therapy, her pain remained raw. She began drinking, and cocaine followed. She would later say the banned substance were the only escape from the constant darkness in her mind. By 15, Abigail had attempted to end her own life twice. That year, she met her first boyfriend, and it was her first taste of what she believed love could be. For 7 months, she felt some kind of happiness, but once the relationship ended, she spiraled again, and her next relationship would be even more damaging. At 16, she began seeing a 29-year-old man, an age gap that raised eyebrows, but no red flags stopped the relationship. It lasted 2 years, ending shortly after she turned 18. She officially moved into social housing. It was a modest space, but for Abigail, it was the first time she had a home that felt like hers. That's when she reconnected with Bradley Lewis. They had known each other during their school years, but now, as adults, something more grew between them. Abigail was 19. Bradley was 17. Their relationship moved quickly, and they soon welcomed their first child. Over the next 5 years, 2 more children followed. By 23, Abigail was a mother of 3, and Bradley, just 21, worked full-time as a floor installer. Abigail stayed home, raising their children and trying to build a life. But living on one income was hard. Desperate to contribute financially, she began seeking alternative ways to make money from home. That's when she discovered the world of online adult modeling. Abigail launched an OnlyFans account. Her content was bold, provocative, and quickly became a success. Within a year, she earned £50,000. While her income eventually decreased, it still provided a steady income and a taste of validation she had never known before. But money didn't solve her problems. Behind the scenes, her relationship with Bradley was deteriorating. Their home life became increasingly toxic, defined by frequent arguments and violent outbursts, followed by recurring breakups and reconciliations. Neither seemed able to walk away. Despite the mounting emotional damage, Abigail's rage extended beyond the home. In one disturbing incident, she attacked a woman in a nightclub bathroom, convinced the woman had looked at her the wrong way. The victim was severely beaten, and Abigail was sentenced to 12 months of community service. In her daily life, Abigail was controlling, demanding that everything go her way. She issued orders to Bradley, with zero tolerance for disobedience, erupting if he didn't comply. She craved constant affirmation, from compliments to gifts, and any perceived neglect triggered violent confrontations. Her need for attention was insatiable. The relationship between Abigail and Bradley had long ceased to be healthy. What remained was a cycle of fights, betrayals, and emotional warfare. Most days were marked by shouting matches and cold silences that stretched late into the night. Their children were caught in the middle, silently absorbing the surrounding chaos. From an outsider's perspective, the solution seemed obvious: separation. However, neither Abigail nor Bradley seemed ready to leave. Their relationship was characterized by infidelity. Though they were not in an open relationship, both cheated, both knew about the other's affairs, and both reacted with jealousy. Abigail, in particular, demanded immediate responses to her messages. Any delay triggering paranoia that Bradley was with another woman. Ironically, while she was also seeing other men, their boundaries became even more blurred when they engaged in group intimate encounters. Their situation was not merely dysfunctional, it was explosive. Things deteriorated further when Abigail became pregnant and discovered that Bradley had also fathered a child with another woman. That betrayal intensified an already volatile dynamic. Abigail's rage was relentless. Friends and family on both sides urged them to separate before something irreversible happened. Abigail's parents openly despised Bradley, not only for his repeated infidelities, but also for inappropriate messages he had allegedly sent to Abigail's sister. Bradley's family, meanwhile, had their own reasons to distrust Abigail, especially after she stabbed him in the leg during an argument. The wound wasn't life-threatening, but it served as a physical reminder of the turmoil they both refused to escape. Around this time, Abigail's previous assault in the nightclub caught the attention of social services. Authorities ordered a welfare check, concerned for the well-being of the children. The assessment was clear. Abigail and Bradley were living in a toxic and potentially dangerous environment. To avoid losing custody, they agreed to live apart. Bradley moved in with his mother, finding his first sense of peace in years. That brief separation gave Bradley clarity, leading him to seriously consider ending the relationship for good. But when he expressed his doubts to Abigail, her reaction was immediate and severe. She threatened self-harm, an alarming threat given her mental health history. Over time, the threats escalated. She said she would kill the women Bradley had cheated with, the mother of his other child, his own mother, and eventually Bradley himself. By early 2022, Abigail's downward spiral was visible to all. She began posting aggressive and disturbing content on TikTok, airing their dirty laundry with no restraint. She mocked Brad, shared intimate details, and even confessed to violent behavior she had inflicted on Bradley. He felt increasingly trapped. He told friends he feared for his safety, but was too afraid of what Abigail might do if he left. On March 18th, she decided to terminate the pregnancy, a decision Bradley supported afterward. One day later, on March 19th, tensions exploded again. Abigail accused Bradley of cheating, and the fight ended with her stabbing him in the arm. He needed medical treatment, but chose not to report the truth, telling hospital staff it had been an accident. At this time, Abigail messaged a friend, admitting that her relationship had become so dangerous that she believed it would end in one of two ways. Either she would be dead or she would end up in prison. She confessed that she believed herself capable of killing Bradley. Just 6 days later, on March 25th, Abigail and Bradley met in a park for what was intended as a final, honest conversation. Abigail brought a friend, likely to maintain a sense of control or for protection. During the meeting, Bradley told her he was ending the relationship, this time for good. To everyone's surprise, Abigail didn't erupt. She didn't scream or lash out. For once, she remained eerily calm, but with her calmness was never a guarantee of peace. It was often the quiet before a catastrophe. Later that same day, they made plans to meet again. A gathering at a pub was arranged, with a few close friends joining them. Abigail brought their 3 children along. Perhaps trying to project a sense of normalcy, they agreed to meet at around 5 p.m. But when that time passed, Bradley still hadn't shown up. By 5:30 p.m., Abigail began firing off angry messages, furious at his tardiness. Her fury was fueled by the alcohol she had already consumed and further amplified by banned substance. The combination only intensified her volatility. When Bradley finally arrived at 7 p.m., he was met not with a smile, but with raw, seething rage. Abigail had convinced herself he'd been with another woman. Bradley retreated to the restroom with a friend, desperate to decompress and speak freely. There, he admitted how lost he felt and how helpless the situation had become. He no longer knew how to reason with Abigail, but even in that small, private space, there was no escape. When Bradley and his friend emerged, Abigail was waiting just outside the door. She exploded, screaming and accusing them of conspiring against her. Before anyone could react, she lunged at Bradley. In front of stunned onlookers, Abigail launched a violent assault. Bradley's friend tried to pull her away to restore calm, but Abigail spat directly in his face. The situation had escalated beyond control. Fearing further violence, Bradley's friends decided to leave. Abigail and Bradley remained, attempting once again to patch things up. Bradley ordered a round of beers, hoping to de-escalate the situation, but Abigail slapped them off the table, sending glass and foam crashing to the floor. Customers looked on in disbelief. Strangers tried to intervene, hoping to prevent further escalation, but Abigail turned on them, too, throwing a drink at one man and spitting in his face. When the man tried to push her away in self-defense, Abigail fell. She immediately called the police to report an assault, omitting the key detail that she had provoked the confrontation. Her children witnessed the entire ordeal, absorbing yet another violent chapter in their already unstable home life. By 8 p.m., Abigail and Bradley and their kids left the pub. A friend they met outside offered them a ride home. On the way back, Bradley made a comment that would later send chills down the spine of everyone who heard it. "I'm already dead," he said, aware of what likely awaited him at home. And he was right. As soon as they stepped through the front door, the argument resumed, louder, angrier, and more volatile than ever. Abigail blamed Bradley for what had happened at the pub, furious that he hadn't defended her against the man she accused of attacking her. At some point during the shouting, Abigail walked into the kitchen and came back holding a knife. Bradley had seen this before. Blades weren't new to their arguments, but this time she didn't hesitate. In one swift, violent motion, Abigail drove the knife directly into his chest. In the background, their 3-year-old son had crept downstairs, drawn by the noise. He witnessed it all. Both Abigail and Bradley froze. The rage disappeared, replaced by stunned silence. Bradley, bleeding heavily, stumbled back into the kitchen and collapsed onto the floor. But instead of immediately calling for help, Abigail panicked. Rather than grabbing the phone, she grabbed cleaning supplies. She put Bradley's blood-stained shirt into the washing machine. She tried to scrub the floor clean. She didn't want anyone to see what she had done, not even herself. This was the third time Abigail had injured Bradley with a knife, but this time she knew it was different. This wound wouldn't fade into a scar. It was too deep. Moments later, hearing the commotion, a neighbor rushed over. She found Abigail distraught, barefoot, wearing a pink dress and sporting a bruise on her arm, but no trace of blood. Bradley, meanwhile, lay motionless on the kitchen floor. Leaning over him to check for a pulse, she felt the faintest trace of breath. With trembling hands, she began performing CPR while still on the phone with emergency services. The operator instructed her to apply direct pressure to the chest wound. As she did, she noticed something deeply alarming. Very little blood was escaping. This was a terrifying sign of internal bleeding, indicating Bradley's body was beginning to shut down. The neighbor attempted to place him in the recovery position, but he was too heavy for her to move alone. Around 8:22 p.m., her husband returned home and immediately sensed that something was wrong next door. When he entered the house, he found his wife desperately trying to keep Bradley alive and took over chest compressions. Time was quickly slipping away. By 8:48 p.m., police had arrived, already spiraling into hysteria. Abigail called a friend, claiming Bradley had harmed himself. She insisted he had tried to take his own life and begged for reassurance that he would survive. The story had already begun to shift. Moments later, paramedics arrived. Bradley, just 22 years old, was rushed to the hospital and taken straight into surgery. but the damage was too severe. The knife had penetrated very deep, straight into his heart. Despite hours of surgical efforts, doctors pronounced him dead. Back at the scene, Abigail White was arrested, but even during her interrogation, she stuck to a version of events that didn't add up. At first, she claimed Bradley had stabbed himself. She then changed her story, claiming he had wrestled the knife from her. Later, she insisted Bradley had grabbed her hand, which was holding the knife, and forced it into himself. The narrative kept shifting, each version seemingly tailored to avoid blame. Unbeknownst to Abigail, there was a silent witness. Her 3-year-old son had seen it all. Incredibly, despite his age, the child was able to give police a clear and damning statement. "Mommy stabbed Daddy." It was a heartbreaking confirmation of what investigators already suspected. The evidence was overwhelming, and eventually, Abigail could no longer deny what she had done. She confessed, but claimed it had been a moment of passion. She insisted she hadn't meant to kill Bradley, only to hurt him in a moment of rage. But one detail was impossible to ignore. Abigail never called an ambulance. While Bradley lay dying on the floor, she chose to mop up his blood, toss his shirt in the wash, and stage the scene. She claimed she'd tried to call for help, but couldn't get a signal. Yet, she managed to contact a friend to spin a story about end his own life. As detectives dug deeper, they uncovered chilling internet searches made by Abigail in the days leading up to the murder. She had looked up how to tie a noose and whether someone could die from a broken heart. On March 17th, just 1 week before the killing, she also searched for miscarriage-related topics and information about stabbing incidents. In October 2022, Abigail White stood trial at Bristol Crown Court. The prosecution presented a large amount of evidence. This included security camera footage from the pub concerning TikTok videos she posted, voice messages, and over 200 statements from witnesses. Her plea to downgrade the charge to manslaughter was rejected. She was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison with a possibility of parole after 18 years. Psychiatrists testified that Abigail suffers from borderline personality disorder, a diagnosis rooted in the profound trauma of her early life. But mental illness alone couldn't excuse the choices she made. Today, Abigail White remains behind bars. Reports have surfaced suggesting she is in a new relationship. It's a fact that continues to anger many who knew and loved Bradley. Still reeling from the loss, his family expressed what so many felt, that no sentence could truly reflect the life that was stolen. They say they were given their own life sentence, waking up each day to a reality without their son, brother, and father of 3. Bradley's memory, however, lives on. Hundreds attended his funeral, and public memorials now stand in his honor. His kindness, his love for his children, and his enduring popularity are remembered by all who knew him. To them, he is not gone. He is still their son, still a father, still loved, and always will be. Nanette Krentel grew up in New Orleans in a humble, close-knit family. Her parents, Dan and Pat Watson, raised her along with her siblings Kim, Eliza, and 3 half-siblings, and taught her important values of loyalty and kindness, known for her gentle and caring nature. Nanette had a deep love for animals and shared her home with 2 cats and a dog. Despite moving away, she maintained a close bond with her family, especially her father and sisters, speaking with them daily. In 1994, at 27 years old, Nanette met Steve Krentel while applying for a job at his office supply store. Steve, then 28, owned both a scuba gear business and the store, and was going through a divorce at the time. Their professional relationship soon turned romantic, and after Steve finalized his divorce, he introduced Nanette to his young son, Justin. By 1995, they were married. Steve's native of Louisiana. He grew up near Lacombe and reportedly had a tense relationship with his brother, Brian. In 2000, Steve and Nanette moved to Lacombe, closer to his parents. He gradually worked his way up in the Tammany Parish Fire Department, eventually becoming the fire chief. Respected for his professionalism His career in the fire department provided him with financial security and influence in the community. In 1997, after Steve sold both of his businesses, Nanette shifted her career path. She began working at a daycare center, where her kind and attentive nature earned the trust of parents and co-workers. Beyond her job, she became involved in the community, organizing fundraisers and charitable events, as well as supporting local fire departments by selling handmade ceramics and baked goods. By 2017, she had been out of the workforce for several years, focusing instead on her home, her pets, and continued community involvement. Although she had no children, Nanette was always concerned and attentive to the lives of her loved ones. She often played a central role in family matters, offering emotional and financial support to her loved ones. To outsiders, she and Steve seemed to lead a peaceful life, residing on 100 acres of scenic remote property in Lacombe. However, behind closed doors, Nanette grew increasingly concerned for her safety after Steve's brother, Brian, was released from prison. Brian allegedly blamed Nanette for the legal issues that led to his incarceration and had made direct threats against her. In response, she urged for additional security measures, having cameras installed around the property and keeping protective tools in her bedroom, car, and purse. She openly shared her fears with her family. Her father and sisters, aware of the escalating tension, were alarmed but did not anticipate just how grave the situation would become. Steve was also concerned and worked with Nanette to increase security. He installed additional cameras, purchased self-defense equipment, and even practiced shooting with her at a local shooting range. However, despite these precautions, the simmering problems in their family did not go away. Behind the facade of a peaceful life, there were bitter family conflicts, growing tensions, and the choices ahead led to unforeseen consequences. On July 14, 2017, at around 2:30 p.m., the St. Tammany Parish Fire Department received an urgent call from Steve's cousin, who lived nearby. He reported seeing thick smoke rising from Steve's property and suspected the house was on fire. Despite the distance between their homes and the dense forest in between, the fire was visible from afar. Steve and his team arrived at the scene around 3 p.m. when the house was engulfed in flames. Firefighters worked into the evening to extinguish the fire, only to discover human remains in the bathroom of the master bedroom. The damage was extensive, but the location of the remains and the fact that no one else lived there indicated the victim was likely Nanette, Steve's wife. No alarms had sounded, and throughout the day, Steve's repeated calls to both Nanette's cell phone and the house landline had gone unanswered. Her car remained in the garage, further confirming she had been home at the time of the fire. Tragically, all the household pets also perished, reflecting the sudden and intense nature of the flames. Federal fire investigation specialists joined the inquiry. Initially, the fire was considered a possible accident, but the circumstances surrounding Nanette's death raised suspicions. Her remains were found in the bathroom, and there was no indication she had tried to escape. This prompted a forensic autopsy, which included DNA testing and an investigation into the cause of death. About a week later, during a memorial service, part of the coroner's preliminary findings became public. It was revealed that Nanette had suffered a gunshot wound to the head, with a bullet found in her skull. This discovery completely shifted the direction of the investigation. On July 18th, the sheriff confirmed the findings, apologized for the delay in communication, and acknowledged evidence of a criminal act. Further autopsy results showed no smoke inhalation in Nanette's lungs, proving that she had died before the fire. Since no weapon was found near her body, the possibility of self-inflicted injuries has been ruled out. The investigation further revealed the presence of 9 security cameras on the property, but Steve stated that the system had stopped functioning several days before the fire. Efforts to recover footage from the damaged equipment were unsuccessful. This lack of evidence, combined with forensic findings, suggested the fire had been intentionally set to destroy evidence. investigators shifted their focus to individuals who might have had both motive and access to the property. However, an official statement confirming foul play in Nanette's death was not released until 4 days after the fire. The family's frustration with the investigation grew, particularly because the coroner had noted the gunshot wound the day after the incident, yet this information wasn't immediately shared with them. Nanette's sister, Kim, a prosecutor in Nebraska, publicly criticized the investigation, pointing to the lack of proper scene containment, which may have compromised evidence. When Nanette's relatives arrived in Louisiana shortly after the tragedy, they found the property unsecured and the house open. Within 2 days, Steve was allowed to return to the site, raising concerns about evidence being altered or lost. It wasn't until Steve's son, Justin, discovered a fragment of a human skull in the debris that authorities finally secured the scene. The incident has left the public losing confidence in Sheriff Randy Smith's department. While federal investigators conduct an independent analysis, they discovered multiple points of ignition and traces of accelerants, confirming the fire was deliberately set. Despite these findings, however, the sheriff did not rule out the possibility that Julie harmed herself, citing the lack of a recovered weapon and inconclusive ballistics test results. Later, 2 firearms were found in the remains of the home, but neither could be definitively linked to the fatal shot. The bullet recovered from Nanette's skull was too damaged for reliable analysis. Additional forensic tests reinforced previous findings, including finding no smoke in Nanette's lungs and no food in her stomach. Despite her having been seen purchasing food at a fast food restaurant that morning, additional inconsistencies came to light during the investigation. There was no blood on Nanette's gunshot wound to the head, as is often the case, leading to speculation that her body may have been moved after her death. An independent expert suggested that whoever moved her was likely familiar with the layout of the house. The sheriff, however, publicly disputed the forensic expert's conclusions. This discrepancy with the findings of federal agents further undermined public confidence in the investigation. Nanette's family began openly questioning the integrity of local authorities and raised concerns about potential conflicts of interest. As discrepancies mounted, the sheriff was eventually compelled to issue a public statement, acknowledging that Nanette's death resulted from a violent act. Despite this admission, the investigation failed to identify the person responsible. The case shifted towards exploring possible motives and suspects with access to the property. Nanette's husband, Steve, was naturally a key subject of interest due to his unrestricted access to the house. He willingly cooperated, volunteered for a polygraph test, and passed. However, since polygraph results are not entirely reliable, investigators didn't eliminate him as a suspect. Steve's alibi was backed by fire department security footage confirming he was at work on the day of the incident, starting at 8 a.m., and didn't leave at any point, including during lunch. This was corroborated by surveillance footage and his co-workers' testimonies. However, it was noted that Steve, working on a Friday, was unusual, as he usually took that day off. Investigators also analyzed Nanette's movements on the morning of July 14th. Traffic cameras spotted her driving between her home and a nearby fast food restaurant, where her bank card was used to buy food. Her car was later seen near her house. About an hour later, a phone call was made from Nanette's phone to an unfamiliar number. The person on the other end claimed not to know her, and the reason for the call remains unexplained. Investigators explored potential personal conflicts and discovered that Steve had been in an extramarital relationship with a colleague. Nanette was aware of the affair and had told others she was considering divorce, which under state law would involve dividing their shared assets, an arrangement that could have been financially disadvantageous for Steve. When questioned, Steve admitted to the affair but claimed the couple had reconciled and planned to stay together. Close family members were also questioned. Steve's son, Justin, had reportedly experienced tension with his stepmother, Julie. In the past, family acquaintances described him as having unusual interests, including a fascination with firearms. However, Justin provided documentation proving he was out of state for work on the day of the incident, which was verified, ruling him out as a suspect. Investigators also looked into Steve's brother, Brian, who had a criminal record and a history of family conflicts. Over the years, Nanette had voiced concerns about his behavior. Shortly after his release from prison, she sent her sister a message describing a specific threat from him, in which he allegedly displayed aggressiveness and hinted at setting the house on fire. These claims were corroborated through their text exchanges. Surveillance footage from their parents' home showed Brian did not leave the premises on the day of Nanette's death. However, a wearable tracking device issued to him malfunctioned and failed to record any location data that day, with the cause of this failure unexplained. Another puzzling incident occurred a month before Nanette's death. A security camera recorded an unidentified man near the entrance gate of the property. He left behind a cigarette butt and a knife. Nanette informed her father about the incident, but the man's identity remained unclear and no investigation was conducted to find out more. After investigating multiple leads, the case remained unsolved. Every suspect either had a confirmed alibi or there wasn't enough evidence to make a formal accusation, leaving the investigation at a dead end. 2 months after Nanette's death, the sheriff made another public announcement. He declared that Steve was no longer a person of interest in the case, explaining that Steve's alibi had been verified. There was no clear motive, and the evidence was deemed insufficient to move forward. However, Nanette's family felt this announcement was premature, as not all digital records had been reviewed. Several witnesses had yet to be re-interviewed, and a detailed timeline of her phone activity leading up to her death was still incomplete. It appeared the investigation was entering a state of stagnation. When Nanette's family requested access to the case documents, their attempts were met with vague responses. Louisiana state law restricts access to investigative materials to the closest next of kin, which in this case was Steve, not Nanette's parents or sisters. Steve did not share these documents with the rest of the family. In search of answers, Nanette's relatives turned to private attorneys and independent forensic experts. One expert, after examining the available evidence, identified signs of deliberate investigative mismanagement, noting that critical protocols for handling cases involving violent deaths and burnt evidence had been disregarded. The conclusions and methodologies of the private experts sharply contrasted with those of the local authorities. Efforts to transfer the case to a different jurisdiction proved unsuccessful. Appeals to the district attorney's office were dismissed, with officials citing a lack of legal justification to relocate the investigation. Frustrated by the lack of progress, Nanette's family turned to social media, launching a page to provide updates and highlight inconsistencies in the investigation, in the hope of pressuring authorities into action. However, the sheriff's actions became a significant obstacle to achieving transparency. His public statements, dismissal of expert findings, and personal connections to individuals potentially linked to the case raised concerns about his impartiality and deepened public mistrust. Despite multiple individuals with potential motives, the investigation failed to reach a definite conclusion. Detectives worked on verifying alibis, analyzing technical records, and identifying gaps in the official narrative. But these efforts often revealed inconsistencies that undermined the credibility of the evidence. A key issue was the absence of location data from the Jeep's-enabled ankle monitor worn by Brian. On July 14th, the day of the incident, the monitor registered no location data, an unexplained blackout. Authorities were unable to determine whether the failure was a technical error or whether the monitor had been intentionally disabled. This missing data represented a major accountability failure and raised serious questions. Another troubling discovery came from a review of footage from a security camera inside Brian's parents' home. The video depicted Brian with a working desk lamp and a visible wall clock in the background, ostensibly providing an alibi. However, Nanette's family questioned the authenticity of this footage, suggesting it could have been pre-recorded or staged. Experts also observed that the angle and focus of the camera appeared unusual for a standard household surveillance setup. Additional uncertainty arose with surveillance footage from a fast food establishment showing Nanette's vehicle. Investigators assumed she was driving the car that morning, but the video quality was too poor to verify her identity. This assumption was based solely on her bank card being used to make a purchase nearby. The situation was further complicated by the fact that there was no footage from her home surveillance system on the day of the incident. Steve claimed the cameras had not been operational at the time, but investigators later found traces of accelerant on the damaged equipment. Experts concluded that the security system had likely been intentionally tampered with before the fire, suggesting someone with knowledge of the camera's locations and purpose had interfered. After Nanette's father passed away, her sisters took the lead in demanding a proper investigation. They launched an online awareness campaign, collaborated with advocacy groups, and participated in discussions on crime-focused platforms. The family repeatedly urged state authorities to transfer the case to an independent investigative body, but their requests were consistently met with generic responses that lacked meaningful action. They were also frustrated by the investigators' failure to review footage from the citywide surveillance system, which could have offered critical context. These shortcomings formed the basis of formal complaints to the district attorney's office. Although officials promised to keep the case open, there was no evidence of real progress, receiving minimal support from local law enforcement. Nanette's family shifted their focus to building a network of allies. They connected with organizations specializing in unresolved cases, which led to increased attention on Nanette's death through podcasts, videos, and media coverage. By 2024, the case remained unsolved. However, new hope appeared when Colin Sims was elected district attorney. Colin publicly expressed his willingness to review the evidence, marking the first sign of possible investigative progress after nearly 7 years of inaction. As of March 2024, Nanette's case was still open, with no charges filed against any suspects. Despite coroner findings, witness testimonies, and independent assessments, authorities in St. Tammany Parish had yet to identify any responsible parties. What initially seemed like a straightforward case had instead devolved into a prolonged stalemate. By mid-2025, the case records were still sealed, and only individuals with legal standing, such as Nanette's husband, Steve, were granted access. The family remained barred from reviewing complete investigative reports, transcripts, or relevant surveillance data. Repeated appeals to state authorities went unanswered. In response, a grassroots group formed by Nanette's friends and family continued to provide social media updates, urging the public to come forward with any useful information. The family also sought assistance from federal agencies like the Department of Justice. In their letters, they raised concerns about potential conflicts of interest involving local authorities and petitioned for the case to be transferred to a higher jurisdiction. Independent experts consulted by the family identified numerous investigative avenues that had not been fully explored, including recovering deleted digital records and re-interviewing key witnesses. However, without official investigative authority, these proposals could not be enforced. Despite years of stagnation, Nanette's family has never stopped fighting for answers. For them, this is about more than personal grief. It is a pursuit of justice. The lack of progress has only strengthened their resolve. They firmly believe the truth can still be uncovered if independent expertise is brought in and the case is reviewed impartially. As of this report, the case remains open but inactive. Nanette Krentel's story highlights how errors, delays, and possible bias can obstruct justice in a major case. Yet, it also demonstrates the unwavering resilience of a family determined to keep her memory alive. Their goal remains unchanged: to uncover the truth, no matter how much time has passed or how many obstacles stand in their way.